Dumb filth named Kyle Lucas had been conducting a wholesome workout session with one of the caked maids, and once the training was finished, he told her that since it was his debut day, he could not mess around with her any longer. He explained that he had only taken out some time to meet her briefly. After that, he asked her about the new girl who had arrived a few days earlier. The maid replied that the girl seemed completely ordinary. She then turned the conversation toward him, remarking that he had spent 10 years protecting a lady and was now serving the young master. She expressed her curiosity about his feelings, wondering whether he felt happy or sad about this change. In response, Kyle Lucas stated that it was simply his duty and nothing more. He then told her that she should stop lingering there because she was going to be late. After saying this, he left the place, thinking to himself that it seemed no one was suspicious of the young master yet. He felt relieved, believing that the face the maid saw every day had managed to deceive everyone there. He reminded himself that he could not afford to be nervous now, and thought that the young master was probably even more anxious. Despite that, he placed his trust in her and believed that they would manage everything successfully. Afterward, he approached Sion Lutheran, who had now disguised herself as her elder brother, Duke Lutheran, in front of the entire court at the request of her father. As they were about to enter the royal hall, Kyle asked her whether she was feeling nervous. She admitted that she was a little nervous. He reassured her by saying that it was only natural and advised her to simply follow everything she had practiced. As they entered the hall, an announcement was made declaring that Duke Lutheran, the latest son of the king and a possible successor of the family, had arrived. As soon as they stepped inside, people began whispering among themselves. Some commented that they had heard he had been occupied with matters of the upper echelons, though others dismissed such claims as nonsense. They noted that he was next in line and would naturally be busy with important affairs. Hearing all this, Kyle Lucas thought to himself that everything seemed fine and that no one appeared to be suspicious. Suddenly, a secretary approached Kyle Lucas and requested a private moment with him, stating that there was an urgent matter concerning Duke Lutheran. After listening, Kyle replied that he understood and that he would relay the message immediately. He then began calling out to the young master, saying that he needed her attention. However, despite calling her repeatedly as young master, she did not respond. Finally, he leaned in and whispered "miss" into her ear, which startled her so much that she let out a scream, surprising everyone present. Quickly reacting, Kyle took control of the situation and escorted her away, stating that the young master was not feeling well and that they should move to the break room. Once inside the next room, he explained to her that he had called her young master countless times, but she had not responded at all. She defended herself by saying that it was not her fault and that whispering into her ear was unfair. Kyle responded by suggesting that she seemed to be playing games with herself, adding that he could not possibly call her miss in front of everyone in the hall. He also pointed out that it was unreasonable to expect her to get used to being called young master within just a week, but emphasized that she still needed to be mindful of it. Feeling embarrassed, she admitted that she understood. This situation had begun a week earlier at the Duke Lutheran estate, where Sion had been standing in confusion, asking her father whether she truly had to act as her older brother. Her father had confirmed that she did. She then asked whether something had happened to her brother, to which her father replied that he had not been well recently and that she did not need to know any further details. He explained that he needed to dispel certain rumors and did not know how long it would take, but insisted that she must take on the role and maintain the act. Sion expressed her hesitation, saying that she was unsure whether she needed to go to such an extent. However, her father insisted that it was absolutely necessary. He further explained that even if she was not interested in politics, she should understand that their family's presence was no longer as strong or commanding as it used to be. Sion reflected on the situation, noting that in a world where everyone was competing to be next in line, she had heard that her father had made a decision that was intended to be beneficial but had ultimately turned out to be the wrong one. Her father acknowledged this, explaining that although it might appear that everything was written beneath the authority of the throne, the top 5 noble families each had their own influence and opinions. He admitted that while he had supported granting the current king's eldest son the successor position, the decision had ultimately favored the eldest daughter instead. He confessed that he had placed his support on the wrong side. He went on to explain that if society were to discover that the family's heir had not appeared for an extended period, especially given their current weakened position, it would be devastating. Revealing that the heir was seriously ill would expose the family's vulnerability, while allowing him to disappear without explanation would only fuel dangerous rumors. For these reasons, he insisted that Sion must act exactly like the heir. He concluded by stating that he had no other choice in the matter, and neither did she, reminding her firmly that as his daughter, she had no right to refuse. Kyle Lucas was also standing there at that moment when the king turned his gaze toward him and remarked that he appeared as though he had something he wished to say. Hearing this, Kyle respectfully responded that he had nothing to say, clarifying that it was not because he lacked thoughts, but rather because he believed he was not in a position where he should be listening to such a sensitive discussion in the first place. He further admitted that, despite this, he had been curious about the reason he had been called there and made to listen to the entire conversation. The king then spoke in a more serious tone, explaining that he did not expect his child to handle everything alone. He stated that this was precisely why he required Kyle's assistance. He reminded him that he had been by her side as her guard since she was a child and that he trusted him more than anyone else in that regard. Emphasizing the gravity of the situation, he said that the dignity and reputation of their family were at stake, and therefore, Kyle must ensure that they were never exposed under any circumstances. He firmly instructed him to always remain vigilant and to protect his daughter at all times, no matter what might happen. Kyle agreed without hesitation, acknowledging the command outwardly, while inwardly his thoughts became more complicated. In his mind, he reflected that even if the situation seemed to be going too far, their ultimate objective was clear: to avoid being discovered at any cost. He recognized that if their secret were to be revealed, it would not only bring shame, but would also lead to severe consequences for the entire family. At the same time, he found himself questioning whether it was truly necessary to go to such extremes. However, despite these doubts, he could not bring himself to say that the family head's decision was entirely wrong. He continued to analyze the situation in his thoughts, recalling that among the 5 great noble families, 3 dukes, including the Lutheran family, had originally supported the first prince. Everything had seemed aligned in that direction until the unexpected happened and the prince suddenly renounced the throne. That single decision had completely disrupted the balance, leaving all of them in a difficult and uncertain position. Although, from an outside perspective, it might appear to have been a complete and overwhelming defeat, Kyle understood that those observing from afar would never truly grasp the complexities involved. He further considered that he could not even begin to imagine the extent of the political maneuvering and power struggles that must have taken place behind the scenes. Regardless of whatever strategies they might attempt, the queen who now stood next in line for the throne would undoubtedly use every resource and tactic available to counter any opposition. He reasoned that she was far from foolish, and because of that, she would not recklessly turn the 3 powerful dukes into her enemies. At the same time, he believed that she would inevitably seek retaliation, not out of personal feelings, but as a calculated move to strengthen and secure her position. From his perspective, the most logical course of action for her would be to target the weakest among the opposing families, while deliberately avoiding unnecessary conflict with the other 2. In light of this, Kyle realized that even if the current plan seemed excessive, it was not without reason. The decision made by the family head carried a certain strategic weight. For that very reason, the young Master Duke Lutheran needed to maintain the appearance of being in perfect health at all times, without giving anyone even the slightest reason to doubt. Although Kyle genuinely wished for everything to proceed smoothly without complications, he remained fully aware of the risks and the fragile nature of their situation. After these thoughts, the scene returned to the present, where both of them were standing in the hall, surrounded by the murmurs of the gathered crowd. At that moment, a red-haired girl approached them with a composed yet playful expression. She remarked that her eyes had been spoiled thanks to Duke Lutheran. Hearing this, Kyle casually agreed with her statement, commenting that the Duke's beauty was indeed remarkable and difficult to ignore. However, the girl immediately clarified her words, explaining that she had not been referring solely to the Duke. She admitted that while the Duke was certainly handsome, the person who had truly caught her attention was the strikingly handsome guard standing right beside him, making her remark all the more direct and unexpected. Lucas asked her whether she had been referring to him just now, seeking clarification about her earlier remark. In response, she replied that perhaps she had been, adding that she might simply be comparing him to the rather rowdy general from earlier. Hearing this, he thanked her calmly, though in his mind he reflected that the reason for such a comparison was likely because he had been occupied with taking care of the real Jonathan. However, the girl did not seem satisfied with such a simple response. She told him not to give her such a vague answer, making it clear that she was genuinely interested in knowing more about him. She then went on to ask whether he had any time later in the morning. Without much hesitation, she instructed him to come to the 3rd floor, to the last room of the drunken sailor, adding that she would be waiting for him there. Meanwhile, Sion had been standing behind them, silently listening to their entire conversation without interrupting. Later, when the debut event came to an end, Kyle Lucas was once again by Sion's side. He remarked that, Considering it was her first debut, everything had gone quite well and that she had handled herself impressively as the young master. In response, she admitted that it had felt overwhelming to stand there alone, yet she had managed to endure it. After a brief pause, she added that she had observed everything, including how he seemed to be getting along quite well with the girl who had been standing next to him earlier. Hearing this, Kyle cautiously asked whether he could go out for a while that day. Immediately understanding his intention, she responded that she knew he was trying to meet that girl. He quickly denied it, insisting that it was not what she thought and asked her to trust him this time. However, she replied that he could not simply ask for her trust so easily. In response, he tried to reassure her, saying that everything he did was for her sake and that he had never once disappointed her before. He then asked her, almost pleadingly, to turn a blind eye just this once. After considering his words, Sion gave him a condition, stating that he must be back at the house by the next morning. She warned him that, if she did not see him when she woke up, she would not forgive him. He promised her that he would return on time, and with that assurance, he took his leave. As he walked away, his thoughts grew more serious. He reflected that he had tried to explain the situation to her, but the girl he was going to meet was far from ordinary. He recalled noticing something unusual about her behavior. Her attention had not truly been on him. While they were talking, she had repeatedly glanced toward the glass cups behind him, which reflected Sion's image. In reality, she had been observing Sion all along. He further reasoned that most people would not have noticed such a subtle detail, as her actions appeared completely natural. However, because he was trained to protect Sion, he had barely managed to pick up on it. From this, he concluded that the girl's true target was not him, but the young master. He believed that she had approached him only as a means to reach Sion more easily. Continuing his line of thought, he concluded that her real objective must be connected to Sion's security and protection. If an outsider sought such information, there was only one effective way to obtain it: by trapping him. Realizing this, he understood the danger of the situation, yet he chose to proceed cautiously. After some time, he arrived at the designated place where the girl was already waiting for him. She welcomed him with a composed demeanor, but at that moment, everything became clear to him. Based on his observations and instincts, he realized that this woman was not an ordinary person at all. She was, in fact, an assassin. She addressed him with a calm and confident expression, stating that she had known he would come. In response, he replied in a composed and courteous manner that a knight should never keep a lady waiting, especially when she appeared to be as eager and expectant as she was. Hearing this, she tilted her head slightly and questioned whether something specific had happened to such a chivalrous knight. She remarked that his demeanor gave off a different impression, almost as if he had shifted from being honorable to somewhat lecherous. However, she did not dwell on that observation for long and instead added that perhaps it did not matter after all, since it seemed that both of them were seeking the same thing. Her words were spoken lightly, yet there was an underlying intention behind them that was not immediately obvious. Kyle listened to her carefully, maintaining his outward composure. Although he responded naturally, inwardly he found himself hoping, even if only faintly, that there might be some truth to her statement that perhaps they truly did want the same thing. However, that thought did not linger for long, as his mind quickly shifted back to a memory from 1 week earlier at Duke Ruslan's residence. In that moment from the past, the king had spoken to him privately in a serious tone. He had explained that he did not wish to frighten Sion, but that Kyle himself needed to be aware of certain crucial matters. He pointed out that the Saren guard, who remained constantly observant of everything around them, and the guard of Jonathan, the heir of the Duke Ruslan household, were fundamentally different in both role and character. Without wasting time on unnecessary explanations, the king had stated plainly that Kyle was an exceptional individual and that he trusted him to understand the weight of his words. He had then given a firm warning, instructing him to always remain vigilant and to be suspicious of everything, no matter how ordinary it might seem. As Kyle returned to the present, standing before the red-haired woman, the significance of that warning became clearer than ever. He realized that if he had not been cautioned in advance, he might have easily been deceived by her behavior and overlooked the subtle signs, ultimately walking straight into a trap without any awareness. Recognizing this, he acknowledged within himself that Lady Sion could already be in danger because of individuals like her. With that realization, he made a firm decision to play along with the situation rather than confront it directly. He understood that acting cautiously and gathering information would be far more beneficial than exposing his suspicions too early. Therefore, he proceeded to engage in a workout session with the red-haired woman, behaving as though everything was completely normal. Throughout the session, however, his mind remained sharp and alert. He continuously reminded himself that in order to uncover her true intentions and obtain accurate information, he needed to maintain this act without revealing anything. As the session came to an end, he informed her that he needed to leave. She responded in a composed manner, suggesting that they should meet again, as if their interaction was far from over. Accepting her proposal, he agreed that they could meet again after 3 days, specifying the first floor as the place, and assured her that he was a man who kept his word. He then remarked that it was somewhat surprising that they had not even introduced themselves yet, considering the time they had spent together. Taking the initiative, he introduced himself by stating that his name was Kyle Lucas and that he served as the guard of Marquess Jonathan Ruslan. In return, she introduced herself as Elaine. Kyle acknowledged her name and responded that it had been a pleasure meeting her. However, even as he spoke those words, he had already come to the realization that the name she had given was not genuine, but merely an alias. Despite recognizing this, he chose not to react in any visible way and maintained his calm and composed demeanor. With their conversation concluded, he took his leave, outwardly accepting that he would meet her again after 3 days. Elaine, who had earlier been praising his good looks, found herself thinking that perhaps she should have returned after finishing what she had initially planned to do. As the thought lingered, she recalled that Tanya had mentioned she would be coming back after completing her task that night. Realizing this, Elaine remembered that several of the weapons hidden in that place actually belonged to Tanya. Concerned that their absence might be noticed, she concluded that it would be better to return them before Tanya discovered that they were missing. With that in mind, she decided to check thoroughly. She began by looking under the mattress, where she indeed found some of the hidden weapons. After that, she moved to the closet, where she discovered 2 more. Not stopping there, she checked the desk drawer and found 3 additional ones. As she continued counting, she realized that the total number of weapons present there had reached 19. Observing the sheer number, she remarked to herself that perhaps she had overdone things, though she reassured herself that it was always better to be safe than sorry. Having gathered everything, she prepared to leave, though she could not help but comment again that she had definitely gone overboard this time. As she lifted the bag filled with the weapons, she noted how heavy it had become, clearly burdened by the sheer quantity she had packed. Carrying all of them with her, she reflected that she really needed to fix her habit of over-preparing, since in the end, it only became a burden for her to carry. Meanwhile, on the other side, Kyle Lucas had not actually left the area as he had pretended to do. Instead, he had concealed himself nearby, waiting patiently in an alley. He thought to himself that by pretending to leave and then secretly following Elaine the assassin, he might be able to track her to her hideout. Once there, he believed he could uncover valuable information, possibly even clues about the mastermind behind everything or anything that could aid him in understanding the situation better. At the same time, he hoped that this would not take too long, as he still intended to keep the promise he had made to Lady Sion and return before morning. As he carefully followed Elaine, maintaining a cautious distance, another presence entered the scene. A girl with cat-like ears happened to notice him and, out of curiosity or suspicion, decided to follow him quietly without making her presence known. Unaware at first, Kyle continued trailing Elaine. Though a faint sense of unease began to creep into his mind, he briefly considered the possibility that someone might be following him. Acting on that instinct, he suddenly turned back to check, but found no one in sight, which momentarily eased his suspicion. However, that sense of reassurance did not last long. Before he could react further, he suddenly realized that he was no longer alone. A woman had already approached him without his notice. She spoke in a calm manner and remarked that it was quite perceptive of him to follow a woman, but warned him that unless he had a desire to die, he should not attempt anything reckless. At that moment, she had already grabbed hold of him, leaving him standing there in complete confusion, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. Kyle Lucas called out to the girl, speaking in a tense but controlled tone, and told her that her sense of heroism seemed to have gone to her head. He explained that she had completely misunderstood the situation and that what she was thinking was not the reality of what was happening. He firmly told her that she should put the knife away from him and leave immediately before things escalated further. However, the girl refused his instruction without hesitation. She replied that she was sorry, but she could not comply with that demand. She made it clear that the person he had been following was her friend, and because of that, it had now become her personal responsibility to ensure her safety and protection, no matter what the circumstances were. Kyle then questioned her directly, asking if she truly considered that person her friend. She answered confidently that yes, she did. At that moment, Kyle suddenly reacted with speed and force. knocking the knife out of her hand so that it fell to the ground. He stated that he could have easily avoided the situation just by leaning his head back, implying that her attack was not as dangerous as she believed. The girl, instead of being intimidated, laughed lightly and responded that her hand speed was faster than he was giving her credit for, almost as if challenging him to test it properly. She then added that if he was really a friend of the person she was protecting, then that alone was more reason for him not to engage in a fight with her. Her statement surprised him slightly, as it carried both logic and confidence. Kyle then explained his side more clearly. He told her that he had spent an entire cardio training session together with that girl earlier. After that, he had allowed her to walk alone at night because he had told her that he was busy. However, he admitted that he returned afterward because he had started worrying about her safety and well-being. Upon hearing this, the girl's expression shifted slightly. She leaned in closer toward him and sniffed him carefully. After a brief moment, she said that she could tell he was not lying, as she could strongly smell the presence of the other girl on him, and it was quite noticeable. She admitted that she now believed she might have been mistaken about his intentions. However, she refused to apologize for her actions, stating that anyone in her position would have reached the same conclusion based on the situation. She further pointed out that Kyle had not shown any fear or hesitation, even with a knife held at his throat. Because of that, she concluded that he was not an ordinary person, and even described him in a blunt and slightly insulting way, calling him dirty. In response, Kyle awkwardly defended himself by saying that he did take a shower every day. The girl then warned him that she would remember his scent clearly from this moment onward, and advised him strongly to make sure that a similar misunderstanding never happened again. After delivering that warning, she turned away and ran off. Later, it was revealed that the girl's name was Tanya. She went directly to Elaine's location. When Elaine opened the door, Tanya immediately pushed her inside without hesitation, clearly agitated. Elaine, confused and concerned, asked her why she was acting so aggressively and whether something had gone wrong at her job or assignment. Tanya, raising her voice, accused Elaine of being the cause of the entire situation. She demanded that Elaine tell her the full truth. Tanya explained that she had just returned from a 2-week job assignment when she unexpectedly ran into her only colleague, and through that encounter, she realized that the person she trusted had actually been followed all the way to their hideout without even knowing it. Elaine cautiously asked if someone had truly been following her. Tanya responded sharply that Elaine already knew the answer to that question, insisting that the man had indeed been tracking her. She then demanded clarification, asking whether Elaine had actually been doing workout sessions with him or whether he was secretly her assigned target. Elaine immediately told her to be careful and not take things too far or harm him. Tanya quickly clarified that she had not killed him. She explained that the man had told her he had returned because he was worried after leaving earlier. She then pressed Elaine further, accusing her of taking on a new assignment during her absence and demanding an explanation for everything that had happened. Elaine responded that Tanya should direct such questions to their boss instead. Tanya admitted that she did not know where the boss currently was or when they would return. She also said she had no information about Veronica's whereabouts. Elaine then explained that Veronica had gone to retrieve information from the boss in order to clear up certain matters and organize the situation. Elaine then revealed that her new target was Marquis Jonathan Ruslan, the sole heir of Duke Ruslan. She further explained that the man Tanya had nearly killed was Kyle Lucas, who was actually Jonathan Ruslan's personal guard. She added that Kyle was also the person she was currently trying to get close to and influence. She clarified that she was still in the early planning stage and was attempting to obtain confidential information from him, since as a personal guard he would naturally have access to valuable intelligence. Tanya questioned whether all of this was truly part of Elaine's job or just an excuse. She sarcastically asked if Elaine had managed to get any real information at all. Elaine became visibly embarrassed by this, and Tanya continued mocking her, saying that instead of properly extracting information, she had simply been doing exercise sessions with him. She further teased her, asking whether she thought she was some kind of devil or expert manipulator. Elaine admitted that Tanya was right and acknowledged that it was her fault for not realizing she was being followed. However, she defended herself by saying that Kyle's behavior, acting politely, and even returning because he was worried, suggested that he might be interested in her and could potentially be manipulated through that interest. She claimed that she was already close to gaining his trust and believed that with a few more encounters he would be completely under her control. Tanya disagreed and insisted that this was still not enough progress. Elaine responded that she understood and said that one meeting was not sufficient, adding that she needed to meet him several more times. She reassured Tanya not to worry and told her not to get involved any further in the matter. When Tanya asked if she had any concrete plan, Elaine confirmed that she did. She then revealed a love potion in her possession and confidently stated that it would be the key to making her plan work. At the Drunken Sailor Tavern, Kyle Lucas sat alone at a table, patiently waiting for Elaine. As the minutes slowly passed, his expression remained calm, but his thoughts became increasingly analytical. He began to assume that Elaine was not simply late due to inconvenience, but rather intentionally delaying her arrival. In his mind, he considered the possibility that she might be trying to unsettle him, test his patience, or make him reveal something through his reactions. He carefully scanned the surroundings and mentally noted that she could already be somewhere inside the tavern, observing him from a distance without being seen. The idea that she might be watching him while pretending to be absent crossed his mind repeatedly. He even entertained the suspicion that she could be attempting to manipulate him in some way. At the same time, he reflected on a deeper concern. If there truly was a rat within their network or state leaking information, then everything he did would likely be exposed to her indirectly. Because of this, he concluded that identifying that possible informant and eliminating that vulnerability should be his highest priority. Just as he finished organizing these thoughts, Elaine arrived, approaching from behind. Without turning fully at first, Kyle spoke to her, remarking that she was feeling like a lifetime late. His tone was casual, but his mind remained guarded. Internally, he continued to think that this delay might have been intentional, and that he could potentially use her behavior and reactions as a way to trace the hidden information leak he was worried about. Elaine asked him directly whether he was angry because she had been late. She explained in a composed tone that she was a busy person and sometimes things could not be perfectly timed. She added a brief apology, mentioning that she had to handle matters without properly informing her father beforehand. Kyle responded smoothly that there was no need for her to apologize. However, he followed it by saying that he would make sure to receive a proper apology later when they were together during their training session. His words carried a light confidence, as if he was already anticipating the next encounter. Elaine, slightly curious, asked him if he was certain he could handle that. Kyle replied without hesitation that he had actually been looking forward to it. During this exchange, Elaine discreetly took advantage of the moment and slipped a love potion into Kyle's drink without him noticing. She then returned the glass to him as though nothing had happened. Kyle lifted the drink and took a sip. Almost immediately, he noticed a subtle difference in taste compared to earlier when he had been drinking alone. The flavor felt unusually sweet and slightly unfamiliar. For a brief moment, he paused in his thoughts, analyzing the sensation. He considered whether the drink had changed or if it was simply his perception in the current situation. He concluded internally that the presence of a woman might be affecting his senses, and he dismissed the idea that anything suspicious had been done. He reasoned that openly questioning it without evidence would be unwise, as it could alert her and disrupt his ability to observe her behavior. So, he maintained his composure and continued acting naturally, while keeping his attention sharp. He also reassured himself that even in the worst case, the effect would likely be minor and manageable. After this, Kyle casually informed Elaine that he had already reserved a room where they could continue their workout session together. Elaine agreed to this without showing any resistance. As Kyle spoke, he absent-mindedly spun the room key around his finger. However, the key suddenly slipped and fell from his hand. When it dropped, Elaine bent down to pick it up. In that brief moment, Kyle subtly and carefully switched their drinks without making it obvious or breaking the flow of the situation. The movement was quick and controlled, ensuring neither of them drew attention to what had just happened. Once the exchange was complete, Elaine straightened up and drank from the glass she now held. After this, both of them finished their drinks as the conversation settled, and they proceeded together toward the reserved room, preparing to continue their workout session as planned. After completing the workout session with Elaine, Kyle Lucas decided that he would take a closer look at her belongings rather than leaving immediately. Moving carefully, he began checking through her things, observing each item with attention. As he did so, he found himself thinking that, much like a skilled assassin, she had arranged numerous hidden compartments within her belongings. This only strengthened his suspicion that she was hiding something important. While continuing his search for the target item, he reasoned that she must have it somewhere on her person, and he assumed that it was most likely concealed within her dress. Acting on that thought, he located her dress and examined it thoroughly. After searching through it, he eventually found a small container, and upon inspecting it, he realized that it contained a love potion. At that moment, everything became clear to him, and he understood that this must have been the very substance she had used earlier to spike his drink. Curious and slightly critical, he opened the container and brought it closer to smell it. As soon as he did, he noted that it had a strong and somewhat unpleasant scent. In his mind, he analyzed that the potion contained many impurities and that its smell was far stronger than it should have been if it were of proper quality. From this, he concluded that she must not have been able to obtain anything better, which led him to believe that she had been quite desperate. Reflecting further on the situation, he recalled that she had previously returned empty-handed, and this made him question her reliability even more. He admitted to himself that he did not truly trust her. However, at the same time, he considered that the situation had turned out to be advantageous for him. He had already given her false information while pretending to act generously, and he felt confident that she would not suspect him in the slightest. He believed that his act of hesitation, pretending as though he did not want to reveal anything, would only make her feel more grateful toward him, further lowering her guard. Once he had finished examining her belongings, he quietly left the room and made his way back to the mansion. Upon arriving, he found the lady already standing there, seemingly waiting for him. She immediately questioned him about whether he had left behind a simple note containing the intended information. Kyle calmly confirmed that he had done exactly that. She then asked him directly whether the information he had written in the note was false, and he reassured her without hesitation that it was indeed fabricated. He went on to explain his expectations of how events would unfold from that point onward. He stated that Elaine would likely have woken up by now, or would do so shortly, considering how exhausted she had been after the workout session. Since she had fallen asleep due to fatigue, he assumed that she would wake up sometime after sunrise. When she did, she would look around the room, notice his absence, and realize that she was alone. Eventually, she would spot the note he had left behind on the table and pick it up to read. According to Kyle, the note would begin with a simple explanation, stating that something urgent had come up and that he had to leave suddenly. It would also include a remark that he had genuinely enjoyed the time he had spent with her, making the message feel more personal and sincere. After that, the note would move on to the more important part. As a supposed apology for leaving so abruptly, he would claim that he was willing to share the secret she had been seeking, the one concerning Marquess Jonathan Ruslan. The note would emphasize that this information was highly confidential and that she must not reveal it to anyone else under any circumstances. It would then go on to explain that the young master Jonathan preferred to remain in solitude so that he could focus entirely on his studies. According to the note, he was currently staying alone in the annex located behind the villa, and there were no guards stationed there. It would further suggest that he might be reading forbidden books or engaging in something questionable, making the situation appear even more intriguing and tempting. Kyle then explained to the lady that he had deliberately added those particular details to make the message seem more exciting and convincing. The lady responded by observing that he had essentially created a scenario that appeared perfect for an assassination attempt. Kyle agreed with her observation, but clarified that it was intentionally made to seem almost too perfect. He pointed out that such perfection would naturally raise suspicion, which was exactly what he wanted. His goal was to prevent her from acting immediately and instead force her to hesitate and verify the information first. He then asked the lady whether she believed that the assassin would personally enter the villa just to confirm the truth of the information. He expressed his belief that Elaine already had a hidden informant, a rat within the residence, who could provide her with information without exposing herself to danger. The lady understood his reasoning and stated that, in that case, the secret informant would likely be sent to check the annex instead. Kyle agreed and added that he was certain Elaine would instruct her informant to investigate the annex, most likely on the following night. Continuing with his plan, he explained that once that step had been set in motion, he would issue a strict warning to everyone in the residence. He would make it clear that no one was to go anywhere near the annex under any circumstances. Furthermore, he would declare that if anyone disobeyed his orders as the head guard and attempted to enter the annex, that individual would immediately be treated as a suspect and a target. The lady pointed out that such a plan would require him to personally keep watch over the annex throughout the entire night. Kyle acknowledged this responsibility and remarked that it would indeed fall to him unless she wished to take on the task herself. Hearing this, the lady laughed lightly and asked whether he truly believed she could handle such a responsibility at her age. Kyle responded in a casual tone that he had only been joking. He then requested that she have a maid prepare some strong coffee for him, as he anticipated a long and demanding night ahead. In response, the lady agreed but also brought up a previous request he had made regarding the annex. She reminded him that he had asked for the room, which had not been cleaned for years, to be restored into a clean, organized, and inviting space. She admitted that she had initially assumed he intended to use it as a personal workout room. Kyle immediately denied this, stating that he was not that desperate. The lady then teasingly remarked that, aside from her, he had already conducted workout sessions with nearly every woman in the residence. This comment caused Kyle to feel embarrassed, and he realized that she had effectively caught him off guard. Trying to regain control of the conversation, he shifted the topic and asked whether she had brought the item he had requested earlier. The lady, noticing his attempt to change the subject, pointed it out with amusement but confirmed that she had indeed brought it. She then handed him the chalk and asked why he needed it. Kyle responded seriously, stating that it was his only chance and that it would serve as a precaution, especially since this was what he considered his final year of safety in case things went wrong. The following night, Kyle gathered all the maids and servants together and made a formal announcement. He declared that, starting from that very night, no one was allowed to go anywhere near the annex. This sudden and strict order surprised everyone present, as it seemed unusual and unexpected. He further added that, although most of the maids would likely be asleep and might not be directly affected, he still wanted to warn them in advance. As for the guards, he instructed them to revise their patrol routes and completely remove the annex from their regular rounds. One of the guards stepped forward and questioned the reason behind such an unusual order. In response, Kyle firmly stated that they were not permitted to ask questions and were only expected to follow his commands without hesitation. As the gathering came to an end, Kyle reflected silently to himself that everything had now been carefully arranged. The stage had been fully set according to his plan, and all that remained was to wait. He believed that the trap was ready for the shameless individual who would attempt to make a move, whether later that very night or by the following morning. Sion approached Kyle Lucas and asked him about the instructions he had given to all the personal staff, specifically the order not to go anywhere near the annex. In response, Kyle downplayed the matter and stated that it was nothing serious. Before the conversation could continue further, the chief maid stepped in and joined them. She explained that she and Kyle needed to make adjustments to some of the clothes he would be wearing while disguising himself as a young master, and therefore they did not want anyone else to see them during that process. Hearing this explanation, Sion found it reasonable and accepted it without further suspicion. Kyle then reassured Sion once again, telling him that there was no need to worry about anything and that he should simply go and get a good night's sleep. He added that they would take care of everything on their own, making it clear that the matter was under control. Later that night, deep into the darkness, Kyle positioned himself near the annex and kept a close watch over the area. As he stood there, observing his surroundings, he thought that although it was quite dark, it was still possible to recognize someone's face if they came close enough. He reflected that he had already taken a nap earlier and was not particularly tired, so all he needed to do now was remain patient and wait for the rat to reveal themselves. To make the situation more convincing, he turned on a light on the second floor of the annex, intending to create the illusion that someone was present inside. He reasoned that since he had deliberately spread false information, the informant would feel compelled to verify whether it was true. Upon seeing the light, they would not be able to ignore it or walk away. Moreover, because he had explicitly forbidden anyone from going near the annex, the restriction itself would make the place even more tempting. He believed that, to the informant, it might even feel like a direct invitation. As he continued to wait, he wondered when exactly the person would make their move. While he was lost in these thoughts, a maid approached him quietly to deliver coffee. Kyle looked at her carefully and asked whether she was the new maid, Anna Katrina. He then questioned why she was present so late at night. She replied that the chief maid had instructed her to bring him coffee, mentioning that she had been told he would be there. Kyle asked whether the chief maid had prepared the coffee herself, and the maid confirmed that she had, adding that it was made strong just as he had requested. Kyle accepted the cup and thanked her for bringing it. Before leaving, the maid added that the chief maid had also asked her to pass along a message that she had deliberately sent a maid whom Kyle was not very familiar with, so that he would not become distracted. Hearing this, Kyle felt a moment of frustration but restrained himself. He simply thanked her again and told her that she should go back and rest. The maid agreed and left quietly. Left alone again, Kyle reflected to himself that he only conducted those workout sessions when necessary and that he was merely taking brief breaks from his demanding duties. He tried to focus himself, deciding that he would remain alert and continue his surveillance of the annex. However, despite his intentions, drowsiness slowly overcame him. Before he realized it, he had fallen asleep. When he eventually woke up, it was already morning. The realization struck him immediately, and he became furious with himself for having fallen asleep while on duty. He acknowledged that such a mistake could have allowed something important to happen unnoticed. However, he quickly tried to regain his composure, telling himself that it was not too late and that catching the rat was still possible. He admitted with some shame how careless he had been, but he also reminded himself that he had prepared safety measures precisely for situations like this. He resolved that he would reflect on his mistake later, but for now, his priority was to identify the culprit. He then proceeded to the second floor of the annex and entered the hallway. Observing his surroundings carefully, he noticed that all the doors were closed exactly as he had left them. This made it difficult to determine whether anyone had entered during the night. However, he reminded himself that he had already planned for this possibility. Looking down, he noticed faint traces of chalk dust on the floor. He recalled that he had deliberately spread a very thin, almost invisible layer of chalk powder the previous night, something that would be nearly impossible to notice, especially in the dark. Thanks to this precaution, he could now confirm that someone had indeed passed through the area. More importantly, he realized that whoever had walked there would now have faint white marks on their shoes. From this, he formed his next plan. He decided that he would go to the shoe closet in the residence and carefully inspect all the shoes. Among them, there would be at least one pair with traces of white chalk dust. The owner of those shoes would undoubtedly be the culprit. He acknowledged that it was fortunate he had taken such an extra measure. However, another thought began to trouble him. He questioned whether his falling asleep had been a mere coincidence or something more deliberate. He reflected that, in the past, he had only fallen asleep when he was completely exhausted and certain there was no danger. He had never before fallen asleep while on active duty like this. The timing also seemed suspicious. It had happened right after he drank the coffee. Recalling his experiences from the darker side of society, he reminded himself that there was no such thing as coincidence. In his view, coincidences only existed for those who chose to believe in them. Acting on this suspicion, he examined the cup from which he had drunk the coffee the previous night. Upon closer inspection, he discovered traces of a sedative. At that moment, he realized that Anna Katrina was responsible for it. Meanwhile, on the other side, Anna Katrina was seen speaking with Tanya. She mentioned that she had been supposed to meet Elaine that day, but did not understand why Tanya was there instead. Tanya, instead of answering directly, commented on Anna's appearance, stating that the maid uniform suited her very well and calling her by another name. Anna questioned her again, asking for the real reason behind her presence. Tanya, now visibly frustrated, explained that Elaine had told her she would be meeting Anna there, which was why she had come to her place. She also added that it had become increasingly difficult to see Anna lately. Anna responded by clarifying that she was not there for leisure, emphasizing that this was an important assignment. She explained that both Teo and Nea were involved, and since Tanya had also been occupied with another mission, she had no choice but to take on this role herself. Tanya replied that everyone in their system had a specific role and that, as part of the assassin squad, Anna should focus on her designated responsibilities instead of directly involving herself in field operations. At this point, it became clear that Anna Katrina was not who she appeared to be. In reality, she was Chief Veronica, operating under a false identity. Realizing the risk of being overheard, Chief Veronica immediately instructed Tanya to lower her voice, signaling that their conversation needed to remain strictly confidential. Tanya questioned Chief Veronica, asking whether she had been unable to see Marquess Jonathan Ruslan at the annex. In response, Veronica explained that Jonathan had not been present there at all. She added that, since Captain Kyle had been guarding the annex so carefully, she had been certain that Jonathan would be inside. In order to secretly enter the annex, she had even used an emergency sleeping pill on Kyle. Yet despite that effort, it had ultimately been of no use in achieving her objective. Hearing this, Tanya concluded that the information Elaine had obtained must have been entirely false. However, Veronica responded more cautiously, stating that it was still difficult to determine that with certainty. She reasoned that if Jonathan had truly not been at the annex, then there would have been no logical reason for Captain Kyle to guard that location so closely. Tanya then suggested a simpler possibility, proposing that Jonathan might have merely stepped away briefly, perhaps to go somewhere nearby like the bathroom. Veronica, however, dismissed this idea by explaining that even if the information had been true, it would not have been particularly useful. She pointed out that the situation did not seem like part of a routine habit, but rather something that had occurred on impulse. Because of that, she could not form a reliable plan based on such uncertain and inconsistent conditions. Tanya, growing slightly impatient, remarked that Veronica seemed to be overthinking the matter simply because the target was a Marquess. In her view, the task was straightforward. She believed all that needed to be done was to slip in quietly, kill the target, and leave without being noticed. She even added that she could likely have completed such a task on her own. In response, Veronica remarked that it seemed Elaine had not fully explained the nature of the mission. She clarified that this assignment was not a simple assassination, but something far more complex, involving layers of planning and caution that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, back at the residence, the chief maid approached Kyle Lucas and apologized, saying that she should have personally delivered the coffee to him instead of sending someone else. She expressed regret, mentioning that perhaps she was no longer as sharp as she used to be and that she might have already reached the age where she should have retired. Kyle immediately dismissed her apology, stating that the fault lay with him for letting his guard down. He also reminded her that he had been the one who suggested that she could send another maid in the first place. The chief maid then asked him directly whether he believed that the absent-minded new maid was actually the mole and what consequences she would face for her actions. Kyle responded that he intended to remove her from the residence once he found a suitable reason to do so. He explained that, given the situation, it was the only practical course of action. He further analyzed the situation, stating that it did not seem like someone had simply bribed or threatened her into cooperating. Instead, he suspected that she might be an assassin herself. He pointed out that when she had brought him the coffee, it was still hot, which meant she had delivered it immediately after receiving it. Additionally, he noted that it was unlikely for an ordinary civilian to carry sleeping pills at all times. What stood out even more was that she had shown no hesitation in using the sedative on him right away. He even remarked that, if by some chance she were truly an ordinary civilian, he would have considered recruiting her due to her decisiveness. The chief maid then questioned whether Anna truly being an assassin was a realistic possibility. Kyle replied that, if that were the case, it would represent the worst possible scenario. He went on to explain that he had a growing suspicion that they were not dealing with just Elaine as a lone assassin, but rather an entire group. He suggested that Elaine and Anna were likely part of the same crew, and that even the cat-like girl he had encountered once in the alley might belong to that same group as well. He concluded that if Anna refused to leave peacefully, they might eventually have to confront the entire assassin crew. The chief maid expressed her frustration, saying that even though they now understood the situation, they might still have no choice but to let Anna go carefully without escalating matters. Kyle agreed, adding that the tricky part was to come up with a convincing reason to dismiss her without revealing that they had discovered her true identity. The chief maid observed that it sounded as though Kyle had already devised a plan. He admitted that he had, but hesitated to share it, joking that she might scold him for it, as she often treated him like some sort of troublemaker. She encouraged him to speak, assuring him that she would not tell anyone and implying that she could already guess what he was thinking. Kyle then explained his plan indirectly, thinking that he would persuade Anna to participate in a workout session with him inside the storage room. At the same time, he would arrange for the chief maid to pass by the area at just the right moment, making it appear as though she had discovered them coincidentally. This would allow them to accuse Anna of engaging in an inappropriate relationship, giving them a legitimate reason to dismiss her without raising suspicion about their true knowledge. The chief maid questioned whether such a plan would really work as easily as he imagined. Despite her doubts, Kyle proceeded with it. He later approached Anna and initiated the situation as planned, while the chief maid observed from a distance. She found herself thinking that Kyle was unexpectedly skilled at handling such situations, even though he often denied being that kind of person. At the same time, Kyle reflected that, from Anna's perspective, agreeing to such a situation might make her believe that he trusted her. If she believed she had gained his trust, she would be less guarded and more willing to cooperate, which would work in his favor. He reasoned that she would not refuse him and might even feel pleased by the opportunity. As the situation unfolded, the chief maid watched the two of them, silently noting how quickly Kyle had come up with such a plan on the spot. She found it ironic that he claimed not to be a strange or questionable man, despite the nature of his actions. Meanwhile, Kyle proceeded with the staged workout session with Anna, setting the plan into motion exactly as he had intended. The chief maid stood quietly outside the room, waiting while Kyle Lucas carried out the cardio training session with Anna inside. As she remained there, listening to the faint sounds from within, she found herself growing slightly concerned. In her thoughts, she hoped that Kyle would not become so absorbed in the workout that he forgot to ask Anna about Henry Cohen, as that detail could prove to be extremely important. While waiting, her mind drifted back to an earlier moment when she had handed Kyle the recommendation letter that Anna had brought with her. She clearly remembered how surprised Kyle had been upon seeing it. He had immediately remarked that the letter was of no use to them now, as they already knew that Anna was an assassin. In response, the chief maid had patiently explained that, for a noble household like theirs, they could not simply hire people through public postings or bulletin boards. Trust was not something that could be given so easily. Instead, they always relied on recommendations from individuals they already trusted. Because of that, she emphasized that the letter still held significance. It could help them trace back who had recommended Anna and vouched for her credibility. Hearing this explanation, Kyle had begun to think more carefully and soon realized that the name behind the letter might be Baron Henry Cohen. He recalled that, if his memory served him correctly, Baron Cohen was known to be a close associate of the young master Jonathan. The chief maid had confirmed this, explaining that it was precisely the reason she had accepted Anna into the household without suspicion. Since the recommendation had come from someone as reputable as Baron Cohen, she had not found any reason to doubt Anna at the time. However, Kyle had then questioned whether Anna herself might have overlooked this connection, wondering if she had assumed that no one would think to verify the source of the letter. In response, the chief maid clarified that she had already taken the initiative to confirm it. She had personally checked with Baron Henry Cohen, and he had stated that he had indeed written the recommendation letter for Anna. This revelation had led Kyle to consider the situation more deeply. He had concluded that there were only two possible explanations. Either Anna had somehow deceived or manipulated Baron Cohen into writing the letter for her, or Baron Cohen had willingly provided it with full awareness of her true identity. Standing outside the room in the present, the chief maid recalled how Kyle had ultimately decided that, regardless of which possibility was true, the matter could not be ignored. He had firmly stated that he would need to confront both Anna and Baron Henry Cohen in order to uncover the truth behind the situation. Coming back to the present moment, Kyle Lucas asked Anna about Baron Cohen, carefully observing her reaction as he brought up the topic. In response, Anna explained that she did indeed have a way to approach him. She stated that she had relied on a connection from her childhood, an old friend, to establish contact with someone of high standing, someone influential enough to provide her with a recommendation letter. She spoke as if it had been a natural and reasonable course of action for her. As Kyle Lucas listened, he found himself thinking that this was exactly the kind of explanation he had expected from her. He internally concluded that she had prepared this excuse in advance, and because of that, he realized that pressing her further with questions would likely not yield anything meaningful. Instead of continuing the interrogation, he chose to shift the conversation. He told her honestly that he had been somewhat concerned that she might turn out to be the daughter of a noble family. He added that he had dealt with a similar situation in the past, and it had caused him a great deal of trouble and unnecessary complications, making him wary of repeating such an experience. After this exchange, the atmosphere between them settled, and both of them began performing the workout session together. The training continued for a while without interruption, giving the impression of normalcy. However, that moment was abruptly broken when the chief maid entered the room. She immediately noticed the two of them and, upon catching them in that situation, called out to Anna in a serious and urgent tone. She stated that she needed to speak with her right away, making it clear that the matter could not be delayed. Later on, Kyle Lucas reflected on everything that had happened that day. He recalled that, following the incident, the situation had escalated due to what had been deemed inappropriate behavior between himself and Anna. As a result, Anna had been approached by the head maid and informed that he had been dismissed, while she herself had been expelled from the residence. What stood out to him was that Anna had remained completely unaware that her true identity as an assassin had already been discovered. From his perspective, everything had gone according to plan. He concluded to himself that the operation to clean the house had been a success, just as he had originally intended. The following day, Sion approached him with curiosity and asked about the new maid, Anna. She wondered aloud whether Anna had gone on vacation, as her sudden absence seemed unusual. In response, he calmly explained that Anna had quit her position and was in the process of leaving due to personal reasons. Sion then questioned why he had not informed her earlier, mentioning that it must have seemed strange when she had waved at Anna without knowing the situation. He replied in a composed manner that it did not really matter, since it was not as though she would ever see Anna again. He then turned the question back to her, asking whether she had grown close to the new maid during her short time there. Sion responded that Anna had only been working there for a few weeks, and that she had not even had the opportunity to properly talk to her or form any kind of bond. Hearing this, he remarked that it was probably for the best, subtly implying that no attachment had been formed. At that moment, the chief maid entered the room carrying tea for Sion. She served it to her, and Sion began drinking quietly. The chief maid then shifted her attention toward Kyle Lucas, her expression turning serious. She stated that now that they had successfully dealt with the hidden assassin within the residence and neutralized the immediate threat, she wanted to know what his next course of action would be. She directly asked whether he intended to meet Baron Cohen next, as it seemed like the logical step forward. Kyle Lucas responded without hesitation, saying that he did not intend to pursue anything further. He explained that the entire situation had originated because Lady Saren had taken the place of the young master, a plan he had never supported from the very beginning. He went on to explain that as long as Lady Saren no longer needed to disguise herself as the young master, she would no longer be in danger, and the root of the problem would effectively be removed. He further mentioned that Duke Ruslan had sent them a letter detailing everything that had occurred and had officially requested that Lady Saren stop impersonating the young master. Additionally, he reminded her that they had already informed the Duke that assassins were targeting the young master Jonathan and that they suspected Baron Cohen's involvement in the matter. Given all of this, Kyle Lucas stated that he had done everything within his power and that the responsibility now lay with the Duke and his people to handle the situation moving forward. The chief maid acknowledged his explanation but expressed her concerns. She stated that while his reasoning was understandable, she did not believe that their task was truly complete. Drawing from her experience of working with the Duke for a long time, she pointed out that he had a tendency to be harsh toward people, implying that the outcome might not be as straightforward or resolved as Kyle Lucas assumed. Her words suggested that there could still be complications ahead. Meanwhile, in another location, Veronica, who had been operating under the disguise of Anna within the residence, was now sitting with her fellow colleagues. She expressed her frustration openly, saying that she could not believe she had been expelled, not because her true identity had been discovered, but simply because she had been caught during the workout session. She admitted that her intention had been to make things easier by getting closer to the captain as his partner, believing it would help her accomplish her mission more effectively. However, she blamed herself for failing to notice the headmaid approaching at that critical moment, acknowledging it as a careless mistake on her part. Elaine responded by trying to comfort her, telling her not to be too hard on herself. She added that she understood the situation better than anyone else and therefore did not place any blame on her, showing a sense of empathy and support. However, Tanya, who was also present, took a more critical and sarcastic stance. She remarked that Veronica had been assigned to honey trap him, yet instead of carrying out the mission properly, she had ended up admiring his abilities. Tanya mockingly questioned what kind of assassin guild they were running if such things were happening. After that, Tanya shifted the conversation to a more serious note and asked Veronica about her plans moving forward. In response, Veronica stated firmly that if she were left with no other choice, she would reveal her true capabilities. She declared that in such a situation, she would not hold back and would destroy anything that stood in her way, indicating her willingness to escalate matters if necessary. Tanya was sitting there with a composed yet critical expression, stating that she wanted to be corrected if she was wrong. But from her perspective, Elaine had gathered information that ultimately proved to be useless. She continued by pointing out that Veronica, despite being inside the Ruslan residence, had not even managed to get many chances to see Jonathan Ruslan, who was their primary target. Based on this, Tanya concluded that everything they had done so far had essentially been a complete waste of time. She then directed her words toward both Veronica and Elaine, asserting that neither of them could accomplish anything without her, and emphasizing that everything she had just said was nothing but the truth. Veronica responded calmly, saying that the reason she appreciated Tanya was precisely because she was not afraid to speak the truth. She added that in their line of work, they needed someone who would not sugarcoat things or hide behind false reassurances. Hearing this, Tanya declared with confidence that she considered herself the moral compass of their organization, implying that her blunt honesty was necessary for their success. Veronica then turned toward Elaine and explained that, as Tanya had already pointed out, Elaine had not been able to gather any truly useful information that could help them establish contact with Marquess Jonathan Ruslan. She further noted that, given their current situation, they were not even operating at full strength since Tu and Nea were away on another assignment. Because of these limitations, she suggested that they might need to reconsider and adjust their plan moving forward. She then asked Elaine whether she was still in contact with the captain. Elaine replied that they had not set a specific time to meet again, but she was confident that if she went looking for him, he would not ignore her or give her a cold shoulder. Veronica acknowledged this and said that it was a good sign, adding that maintaining such a relationship with the captain could prove useful. At that moment, Tanya interjected with a teasing tone, remarking that someone seemed unusually happy, especially considering how she had mentioned having a great workout session with the captain earlier. Veronica quickly told Tanya not to overthink things, stating that she was merely imagining scenarios and that Elaine was surely well aware of the consequences of becoming emotionally attached to a target. Elaine responded firmly, stating that she was a professional and that she knew how to separate her work from her personal feelings. However, Tanya expressed her skepticism, saying that she found it difficult to believe her and suggesting that perhaps it would be better if she herself handled the honey trap mission involving the captain. Veronica replied that such a task might not necessarily suit Tanya, implying that each of them had different strengths and roles to play. Meanwhile, inside the residence, Kyle Lucas was lost in thought. He reflected that they had successfully removed the assassin who had been hiding within the residence, and as a result, Lady Saren no longer needed to continue pretending to be the young master. However, despite this success, one concern still lingered in his mind: Baron Cohen. He thought about the possibility that Baron Cohen, who had long been a friend of the young master, might be involved in something suspicious. He considered whether the Baron might be planning to betray the young master, or whether there was an even deeper scheme at play. Nevertheless, he ultimately concluded that it was no longer his responsibility to worry about such matters. To him, the only thing that truly mattered now was ensuring Lady Saren's safety. Suddenly, Sion approached him from behind and called out his name, breaking his train of thought. He turned to her and asked if she needed anything. Sion observed that he seemed distracted, commenting that his mind appeared to be somewhere else. As he looked at her, he noticed that she did not seem very happy. He thought to himself that he could not really blame her, considering how hectic things had been lately and how he had not been giving her much attention. Sion then expressed her feelings, telling him that he had been going out every night and that even when he was with her, he seemed preoccupied with other thoughts. In response, he apologized sincerely, admitting that he had not been paying enough attention to her recently because he had been dealing with an important matter. He reassured her that now that the issue had been resolved, it would not happen again. Sion accepted his explanation and simply responded that it was all right. At that moment, a maid approached Kyle Lucas and informed him that a lady was waiting at the main entrance of the residence and was asking to see him. The scene then shifted to the entrance, where Elaine was arguing with the guards, insisting that they allow her to enter. From inside, Kyle Lucas and Sion observed the situation through a window. Kyle Lucas questioned why Elaine was there, while Sion watched with curiosity, noting that the woman looked familiar. She soon recognized Elaine as the same person he had been speaking with at the party and asked him why she had come to the residence. He quickly clarified that she should not get the wrong idea, insisting that he had not invited Elaine and that he intended to send her away immediately. However, before he could leave to do so, Sion stopped him and suggested that he should invite Elaine inside as a guest. A maid standing nearby acknowledged the instruction and prepared to relay the message. Kyle Lucas then asked Sion why she had made that decision. Sion explained that she did not want to appear rude, as Elaine had come all the way there to see him, and it would not be appropriate to treat her coldly at the gate. She added that there might be an important reason for her visit and insisted that he should allow his friend to meet with her. She further remarked that when she became determined about something, she intended to follow through with it. After saying this, she walked away, leaving Kyle Lucas to deal with the situation. On the other side, Tanya was with Veronica, asking whether this situation was the one she had been talking about earlier. She admitted that this kind of task was not really her style and that she had never done something like this before. Veronica responded by explaining that as long as she could find a proper hiding spot, it would not be a problem. She instructed her not to speak unnecessarily once inside and to only say what was absolutely required. After that, the two of them entered a room where a young girl was standing. Veronica, acting as the one in charge, addressed her and expressed hope that the people there had not harmed her or treated her poorly. The girl responded that it had not been as bad as she had expected and even remarked sarcastically that if the food had been better, she might have thought she was staying in a 3-star hotel. Veronica then told her that if she had not caused trouble, she would not have ended up in solitary confinement. She reminded her that she had warned her not to give the people there a hard time, especially since they were not even fully aware of what they were involved in. The girl, however, responded bluntly, telling Veronica to stop pretending as if she cared about her and to reveal the real reason she was there. Elaine, who was also present, reacted with visible disgust, attempting to step forward as if the situation irritated her. Veronica, however, remained composed and told the girl that they were not there to engage in casual conversation or small talk. She stated that the reason for their visit was the same as always. She then threw a paper toward the girl and instructed her to write down everything she had said. She emphasized that, as usual, it needed to be written neatly and properly, as they intended to send it to Baron Cohen. On the other side, Elaine was meeting with Kyle Lucas in the residence. She was saying that since he had not invited her personally, she assumed he might not be very pleased to see her there. However, she also added that despite arriving without notice, she had not expected to be received so openly and treated as a guest in such a formal manner. In response, Kyle Lucas, who had already arranged for her to be seated and served food, looked at her. He stated that he did not fully understand her purpose for coming if she herself believed she would not be welcomed. He further asked whether she had truly considered it a good idea to appear unannounced in such a place, especially without any prior communication or arrangement. His tone carried mild disbelief rather than hostility. Elaine, hearing this, responded with a faint sense of embarrassment and said that it was somewhat rude for people to whisper among themselves while a guest was still present in the room. Her comment created a brief moment of tension, as she noticed the subtle reactions around her. Sion, who was also present in the room, calmly remarked that regardless of how familiar any of them were with each other, basic manners should still be maintained. She emphasized that guests should not be made to feel uncomfortable, and conversations should remain respectful in their presence. Kyle Lucas then clarified to Elaine that it was actually Sion's decision to properly welcome her and treat her as a guest, despite the unexpected visit. He then added in a firm but controlled tone that she should be careful not to say anything careless or inappropriate in front of Sion, as it could easily be misunderstood. Sion then turned her attention toward Elaine and asked her directly about the nature of her relationship with Kyle Lucas. Elaine paused for a moment before answering, then said that it would probably be most accurate to describe it as them gradually getting to know each other. Kyle Lucas immediately rejected that description and stated bluntly that, at best, they were nothing more than drinking companions. His straightforward response caused a slight shift in the atmosphere. Elaine, pretending to be slightly hurt, placed a hand over her chest and said that he was hurting her feelings with such a cold statement. Watching this exchange, Sion began to feel a subtle sense of jealousy. Internally, she wondered whether Elaine was intentionally trying to gather information while acting so casually, and she unconsciously began imitating the way Elaine spoke to Kyle Lucas. Kyle Lucas noticed this change in her behavior and looked at her with surprise, asking if she was feeling unwell or acting strangely. Without responding verbally, Sion suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him slightly closer, declaring that he should stay near her because he was her guard. Her tone was firm, almost possessive. Elaine, observing this sudden closeness between them, commented that the two of them appeared to be unusually close. She then pointed out that Kyle Lucas had introduced himself as the Marquess Jonathan Ruslan's guard, but had not mentioned his earlier connection to Lady Sion. Kyle Lucas calmly explained that before taking on his current duty of protecting Marquess Jonathan Ruslan, he had in fact served as Sion's personal guard for a long period of time. However, he added that this was no longer his role. While saying this, he glanced briefly at Sion and thought inwardly that he needed to establish a clear boundary between their current positions, although Sion's expression suggested she was not entirely comfortable with that thought. After a short pause, Elaine stood up and spoke in a more composed tone. She said that although she had arrived without prior notice, she sincerely appreciated the hospitality she had been shown. She added that it had been a pleasure speaking with both of them, but expressed a mild sense of disappointment that Marquess Jonathan himself had not been present to meet her. Kyle Lucas responded in a straightforward manner, saying that Marquess Jonathan was not someone who had the time or inclination to meet people who arrived unexpectedly without arrangement. His reply made it clear that such expectations were unrealistic. Elaine nodded and replied that she understood his point, but explained that since Marquess Jonathan was an important figure in society, she had simply hoped for a brief opportunity to meet him at least once. At that moment, the chief maid entered the room and addressed Kyle Lucas. She asked whether he truly intended to allow Elaine to leave the residence alone. She reminded him that as a knight, he was expected to act responsibly in such situations and ensure proper conduct toward a guest. Sion immediately responded, saying that it was not strictly necessary to go that far. However, the chief maid insisted, stating that since their guest appeared somewhat disappointed, it would be appropriate for Kyle Lucas to escort her personally and walk with her for a while. She added that this was also part of his duty and responsibility. She further warned him to make it clear to Elaine that unannounced visits of this nature should not happen again in the future. Reluctantly, Sion agreed and allowed Kyle Lucas to escort Elaine outside, though she strictly instructed him not to remain out for too long at night and to return as quickly as possible. After that, Kyle Lucas left the residence together with Elaine. After completing the workout session, Elaine told Kyle Lucas that she was about to leave. Kyle Lucas asked her if it was really alright for her to part ways like this, and she replied that she would be fine, but if her father were to see the two of them together there, he would kill her. Hearing this, Kyle Lucas thought to himself that he had known all along she would not lead him to her hideout. Elaine then advised him that he should return to his residence. She added that they had been so absorbed in their training that they had not even noticed how much time had passed, and that Lady Sion must be waiting for him at home by now, probably feeling angry as well. Kyle Lucas agreed, but as he thought about it, he recalled that a certain shop was located in that area and wondered whether it might still be open at that hour. Later that night, he returned to the residence, where Sion was already standing, and remarked that she had told him to come back early. In response, he presented her with an apple cream pie, explaining that he had seen it on his way back and thought she would like it. At the same time, he reflected internally that he needed to maintain some distance from her so she would not develop false hopes, though he reasoned that occasional gestures like this might still be acceptable if they helped her feel better. However, Sion responded that if he truly believed she would simply overlook everything because of such a gesture, then he did not understand her at all. After some time, she began eating the pie and commented that it was very good. Kyle Lucas mentioned that he had heard it was a hidden gem and expressed relief that she liked it. He then added that it would have been better to have some black tea with it, but admitted that he was not confident he could go into the kitchen without being caught by the chief maid. Sion remarked that if the chief maid were to find out, she would likely scold her for eating pie so late at night. Kyle Lucas responded that it probably tasted even better because they were eating it in secret, which caused both of them to laugh. Sion then said that it was not just because of the delicious pie, but that she would forgive him this time. She further stated that she did not know what kind of relationship he had with Elaine, but that it was not her place to pry into his personal matters. Upon hearing this, Kyle Lucas looked at her and thought that her last remark sounded somewhat frightening. At that moment, he noticed that there was pie smeared around her mouth, so he leaned in and wiped it off, telling her that she had gotten it all over her face. Suddenly, someone entered the room holding a knife, making it seem as though an attack was about to occur. However, it turned out to be the chief maid, who had come in while cutting the cake. She began commenting on the cake, noting that it was overflowing with cream and describing its appearance in detail, even mentioning how generously butter had been used. Kyle Lucas remarked that this must mean it was delicious, but the chief maid responded that it was not to her taste. She then pointed out that he had secretly given such a sugary dessert to Lady Sion at such a late hour, adding that he should have known she had outgrown that stage. Kyle Lucas replied that it should not be a problem, but the chief maid insisted that Lady Sion had already had enough cake. Sion quickly clarified that she had only intended to have a small taste. The chief maid then said that in that case she would take it away and that Sion could have some more the next day. Before leaving, she looked at Kyle Lucas and informed him that he had received a letter while he was gone, and that an important guest would be arriving the following day, so he should be prepared. Upon hearing this, Sion remarked that he had finally decided to show his face, adding that he was the main reason she had been going through all this trouble, and that he had better come and thank her. Curious, Kyle Lucas asked Sion who the guest was, and she replied that it was obvious it was her brother, Jonathan. The next day, Sion was sitting together with Jonathan when he told her that he was glad to see she was doing well, but clarified that he had not come there specifically to see her. Sion responded coldly, remarking that it was great news because she had no intention of entertaining his silly nonsense that day. Jonathan looked at her for a moment and commented that she had grown a lot. He reflected on how she used to be small and would follow him around everywhere, and noted that she had now become a proper lady. Hearing this, Sion shouted at him to shut up. Jonathan apologized, but then added that he genuinely felt bad for her, admitting that he knew she had been going through a lot because of him. In response, she told him that if he truly understood that, then he should hurry up and recover. She then questioned why he was there. Jonathan replied that she should arrange a room for him, as he wanted to speak with Kyle Lucas in person. Sion questioned why he did not want to talk to her instead, to which Jonathan explained that the matter involved boring political issues. He elaborated that it concerned how the first prince had relinquished his right to the throne and fled abroad to study, while still behaving as though he had already become the ruler despite not being officially crowned yet. He further explained that since she would be pretending to be him, she would need to understand all of this in order to properly converse with other noble families. However, he added that he was sure she would not want to hear such matters. He concluded by saying that he would explain everything to Kyle, who could later fill her in on the details. He then added, somewhat teasingly, that if his baby sister wished to stay and listen to her big brother talk, he had no objections. Sion replied that she would be in her room and asked to be called once they were finished, after which she left the room. After she departed, Kyle Lucas remarked to Jonathan that he always seemed to know how to handle her. Jonathan responded that once she set her mind on something, there was no reasoning with her, so it was best to let her leave of her own accord. At that moment, another guard, Reina, approached Kyle and commented that he had a troubled look on his face, adding that he should not look that way when he had such an important friend present. Kyle replied that it was not because of her, and reasoned that if the young master had come all this way despite his condition just to speak with him, then it was unlikely to be good news. Reina responded that Kyle was as sharp as ever, but stated that she should not be the one to deliver such news and that he should hear it directly from the young master. Jonathan then told Reina that if she was done catching up with Kyle, she should go to Sion. After receiving the instruction, Reina left the room. Once they were alone, Jonathan spoke to Kyle in a sarcastic tone, admitting that he had been quite shocked upon hearing the news. He revealed that the individual who frequently appeared in the family's confidential documents under the alias Hound had been Kyle all along. He remarked that after all the time they had spent together, including Sion as well, he had believed they were somewhat friends and expressed his disappointment. Kyle responded apologetically, explaining that, as Jonathan himself had said, the matter had been confidential. However, seeing that Jonathan now knew everything, Kyle assumed that the Duke must have told him the truth. Jonathan replied that he was not entirely certain whether his father had told him everything, and added that he could not be sure if the old man was still hiding something. Kyle responded by saying that Jonathan should not speak about his father in such a manner. Suddenly, Jonathan began coughing violently. Kyle moved closer to him, expressing that he had started to feel relieved, thinking Jonathan was getting better. But now it seemed that was not the case. Jonathan admitted that he had not wanted Sion to know the truth, so he had been pretending to be in better condition than he actually was. He added that it was likely due to his pride as an older brother. He then stated that he did not have the strength to sit and talk for long, so he would get straight to the point. Jonathan explained that the matter Kyle was probably most concerned about was his request to prevent Sion from taking his place due to the assassination attempts. He then revealed that their father's response to that request had been a clear denial. Kyle calmly stated that it was fine, showing little visible reaction to the news. In response, Jonathan observed that Kyle was handling the situation far better than he had anticipated. He admitted that he had expected Kyle to question the reasoning behind the rejection of his request. However, Kyle replied in a composed and almost detached manner that, much like his alias implied, he was nothing more than the Duke's hound. He elaborated that when the Duke commanded him to sit, he obeyed without question. When told to bark, he did so, and when ordered to kill, he carried it out without hesitation. From his perspective, he existed to follow orders, and therefore had no authority to question or influence such decisions. Jonathan then shifted the conversation, explaining that since he needed to report back to his father, it was important for him to understand what Kyle intended to do next. Kyle responded by referring to the contents of the letter he had already sent. He reiterated that Anna Katrina, the newly appointed maid who had been exposed as an assassin, had been recommended by an unknown party. Because of this suspicious detail, he now intended to direct his investigation toward Baron Henry Cohen, whom he believed might be connected in some way. Jonathan immediately reacted to this, firmly stating that Henry was his close friend and that he could not possibly be involved in such a conspiracy. However, Kyle remained steady and pointed out that personal trust or friendship could not serve as valid grounds to remove someone from suspicion. Jonathan countered this by emphasizing that it was still only a suspicion and questioned whether Kyle intended to act on it by force, such as barging into Henry's residence and conducting a direct search. Kyle clarified that such a reckless approach had never been his intention. Taking into account that Baron Henry Cohen was a longtime and trusted friend of Jonathan, he believed it would be more appropriate to investigate the matter quietly and without drawing unnecessary attention. He added that if Henry truly turned out to be innocent, he would not want to damage Jonathan's relationship with him through careless actions. Jonathan acknowledged this reasoning and admitted that he was relieved to hear that the investigation would be conducted discreetly. However, he also pointed out that such an approach would not be easy and would likely require careful planning. He then asked whether Kyle had managed to uncover any leads that could guide the investigation further. Kyle confirmed that he had. He explained that during Anna's time at their residence, there had been one individual she spent the majority of her time with. This indicated a close connection, making that person a likely source of useful information. He identified this individual as Cecil Jones, the one responsible for training Anna, and expressed confidence that she might possess valuable insights. Jonathan responded with confidence in Kyle's abilities, stating that such investigative work was clearly his area of expertise. He then noted that he had fulfilled his responsibilities as Marquess Jonathan Ruslan by delivering all necessary information and suggested that they now set aside their formal roles and speak more casually as friends. Taking on a more personal tone, Jonathan asked Kyle for his honest opinion regarding who might be the true leader behind the assassins sent to target him. He admitted that, despite the suspicions, he did not believe Henry Cohen was responsible. Kyle hesitated slightly, remarking that the topic felt somewhat heavy for what was meant to be a friendly conversation. However, Jonathan reassured him that the discussion would remain strictly between the two of them, adding that his father would not involve the family's spy network in this particular exchange. With that assurance, Kyle began to explain his reasoning. He stated that, in most assassination conspiracies, the The primary suspect is usually the individual who stands to gain the most from the victim's death. In the current situation, that logic would point toward the first princess. Jonathan interpreted this by asking whether Kyle believed the princess might be acting out of personal motives, perhaps seeking revenge against those who opposed her ascension to the throne, including himself. Kyle responded thoughtfully, explaining that while such a motive was possible, it would be overly personal and not strategically beneficial. Instead, he presented a more calculated perspective. If Jonathan were to die, the Ruslan household would be left without an immediate heir, which would allow the royal authority to label the household as unstable. This, in turn, would create an opportunity to intervene or even purge the household under the justification of maintaining order. Jonathan followed this line of reasoning and expanded on it further. He explained that eliminating a household without a clear successor would not provoke strong resistance from other noble families. Among the 5 great families, only 1 supported the first princess, while 3 stood in opposition. Directly confronting all 3 opposing families would be unwise, as it would leave her outnumbered. Instead, a more effective strategy would be to target a single household as an example. By punishing one family, she could intimidate the others, while simultaneously offering leniency to the remaining 2 in order to secure their cooperation. The targeted household would then be portrayed as a common enemy, strengthening unity among the rest. Jonathan concluded that while this was a simple and well-known political tactic, it remained highly effective. He then remarked that Kyle's analysis closely aligned with the conclusions reached by their family's spy unit. However, Kyle stated that his own perspective differed slightly. He admitted that, at the very least, he did not believe the royal family was directly responsible for the assassination attempts. He reasoned that the scenario they had outlined seemed too straightforward and almost overly convenient. While it was true that the first princess appeared to benefit the most from Jonathan's death, such an obvious move could also backfire by uniting all opposing factions against her. Kyle then presented an alternative theory. Given that there were 3 households opposing the princess, including the Ruslans, he suspected that the other 2 families might be involved. Jonathan admitted that he struggled to see what those families would gain from targeting him. Kyle explained that if the Ruslan household were weakened or destabilized, those families could present it as an offering to the first princess. By encouraging her to make an example out of the Ruslans, they could demonstrate their loyalty and use the situation as a bargaining tool to ensure their own survival. Jonathan reflected on this and remarked that such a scenario implied that alliances were fragile and that yesterday's allies could easily become today's enemies. Kyle agreed, stating that such shifts in loyalty were common in their world and were often driven by survival rather than trust. Hearing this perspective, Jonathan admitted that it was both new and unsettling, yet strangely reassuring. He expressed that he had been deeply concerned about the possibility of standing in direct opposition to the royal family and felt a sense of relief, knowing that the situation might be more complex than it initially appeared. He then sincerely asked Kyle to continue watching over the Ruslan household, including his sister, as they navigated the uncertainty ahead. Kyle responded with unwavering loyalty, stating firmly that his heart had always belonged to the Ruslan household. He assured Jonathan that his allegiance would not change, no matter how complicated the situation became, and that he would continue to stand by them. Jonathan finally stated that, in the end, Kyle was the one person he could truly trust. He added that he would be leaving now, admitting honestly that his body had been demanding rest for quite some time. He also asked Kyle to convey his apology to his sister, Sion, explaining that he could not say goodbye to her in person because he was no longer able to hold back his coughing. Before departing, he lightly added that he wished Kyle a very happy hunting, as if trying to end things on a familiar note. Kyle smiled faintly at this and remarked that Jonathan seemed unusually eager to say that particular line. Jonathan admitted without hesitation that it was true, and after saying so, he turned and left the room. After Jonathan's departure, Kyle went to see Sion. As soon as he arrived, she expressed her concern, stating that her brother had been lying. She explained that she could always tell when he was not being truthful, and although he had acted as if he were fine, his condition was clearly far worse than he had let on. She added that it worried her even more when he tried to pretend that everything was normal. Hearing this, Kyle quietly reflected that Sion was far more observant than most, which meant he would need to be more careful around her. However, he also reminded himself that he had a responsibility to fulfill. His next step was to speak with Cecil, though he acknowledged internally that there was one complication: she was likely still upset with him. With that in mind, Kyle went to meet Cecil. Upon arriving, he brought her a piece of cake and a drink, attempting to soften the interaction. He then explained that since she had spent the most time with Anna Katrina, He wanted to gather some information about her. Cecil looked at him with clear displeasure and pointed out that he only ever came to her when he needed something. She added that he did not even remember the last time they had spent any meaningful time together. Kyle responded by saying that it had been about a month and a half ago. However, Cecil immediately corrected him, stating precisely that it had been 3 months and 7 days and counting, making it clear that she had been keeping track. Kyle then tried to justify himself, explaining that he had already told her the situation and the chief maid was highly suspicious and it was best for them to keep a low profile. He added that nothing good would come from being discovered by her. Cecil, however, was not convinced and remarked that this excuse was rather convenient, especially after such a long time. At that moment, Kyle realized that as long as she remained upset with him, she would not willingly share any useful information. Internally, he acknowledged that he did not have the time to slowly mend things between them. As a result, he decided that he had no choice but to resort to the quickest and most effective method available. He then instructed Cecil to come to the second floor of the annex later that night, telling her that he would be waiting for her there. That night, Cecil arrived at the designated location where Kyle was already present. Without further words, the two of them began engaging in a cardio training session together. After completing the workout session, Kyle decided that it was finally the right moment to gather information from Cecil. Instead of confronting her directly, he carefully devised a believable story. He explained to her that some valuable items had recently gone missing from the residence and that he had started to feel suspicious of Anna. Maintaining a calm and thoughtful tone, he asked Cecil whether she could recall any incident in which Anna might have tried to enter the residence or behaved in a way that seemed out of the ordinary. Cecil paused for a moment, trying to recall any such detail. After thinking for a while, she admitted that if she reflected deeply, one particular incident did come to mind. She explained that on one occasion, while they had been on their way back home, Anna had suddenly asked her for permission to briefly meet a friend. Cecil mentioned that at the time, she had found it somewhat irritating that a new recruit would already ask to step away from her duties. However, she also confessed that she herself had been feeling slightly tired and had wanted a short break, which ultimately led her to agree. She went on to explain that she had followed Anna, partly out of curiosity and partly to ensure nothing unusual was happening. They had entered a tavern together, where Anna went to meet someone who, from the way things appeared, practically lived there. Anna had casually mentioned that she would just go inside to greet her friend for a moment. To make things easier, she even brought Cecil a beer and encouraged her to relax while she handled her own business. Thinking back on the situation, Cecil realized that Anna might have deliberately done this to keep her occupied and quiet, since drinking on duty would prevent Cecil from reporting anything without implicating herself. Cecil continued by saying that she had tried to discreetly observe Anna's friend. Unfortunately, she had not been able to see the person's face clearly because they were wearing a cloak that concealed most of their features. However, from the figure and posture, she believed that the person was a woman. She ended by saying that this was all she could clearly remember from that incident, as nothing else had stood out at the time. Kyle listened carefully to every word, analyzing the information as it was being revealed. He then remarked that the mysterious individual could potentially be either an accomplice or perhaps a fence involved in handling stolen goods. Still unsatisfied, he asked Cecil if there was anything else she could recall about the person, emphasizing that he needed more details to piece everything together. Cecil shook her head slightly and replied that she did not remember anything particularly specific, but after a moment of thought, she added that she did recall one detail: the color of the woman's hair that had been visible beneath the cloak. It had been red. That single detail immediately triggered a realization in Kyle's mind. He mentally reviewed everything he knew and concluded that the only person with red hair who fit the situation was Elaine. Trying to remain composed, he asked Cecil if she remembered the name of the tavern where this meeting had taken place. Cecil responded that the tavern had a rather unique name, one that matched a well-known fishing song. It was called Drunken Sailor. The moment he heard the name, Kyle recognized it instantly. It was the very same place where Elaine had previously asked him to meet her. At the time, he had assumed that she had simply mentioned a random tavern without much thought, but now he began to suspect that the choice had been intentional. Reflecting on everything Cecil had told him, he started forming a theory that the tavern might serve as a rendezvous point for assassins. If that assumption was correct, then it would be the perfect place to begin his investigation. He reasoned further that if such individuals frequently gathered there, then there was a strong chance that the tavern staff, particularly the owner, might have noticed suspicious behavior over time. Even if they were reluctant to speak, Kyle believed that offering a generous sum of money could persuade them to share valuable information. At the very least, It would give him a lead to follow and possibly bring him closer to uncovering the network behind all this. Just as the conversation seemed to be ending, Cecil recalled one last detail and mentioned that the same red-haired woman had also visited Kyle the very next day. She wondered aloud whether that could simply be a coincidence. Kyle responded calmly, stating that many women could have red hair, as if dismissing the idea. However, internally, he acknowledged that this was exactly why one needed to remain cautious around such individuals, especially those who could easily blend in or mislead others. Deciding that the discussion had gone on long enough, Kyle shifted the focus back to training. He remarked that if Cecil had enough time to dwell on such matters, then they should make better use of it by continuing their cardio workout together. Cecil agreed, and the conversation naturally came to an end as they resumed their training session, spending the rest of the time productively. The following day, in a different setting, Tanya was seen speaking with Elaine. With a serious expression, she questioned whether Elaine had truly gone to the Ruslan residence and conducted a workout session with the guard. Elaine responded in a composed yet slightly defensive tone, explaining that she had only followed the chief's orders. She stated that she had been instructed to maintain her relationship with him and that everything she had done was in accordance with those instructions. She also added that Tanya had no reason to raise her voice over the matter. Chief Veronica, who was present during this exchange, intervened and acknowledged that even if she had given such instructions, she had not expected Elaine to interpret them in that specific manner. However, rather than escalating the situation, she admitted that the lack of clarity might have been her own fault. Tanya, however, was not satisfied with this explanation. Growing more frustrated, she argued that if Elaine had been able to enter the residence without raising suspicion, she should have taken full advantage of the opportunity to gather useful intelligence. In her view, such chances were rare and should not be wasted so easily. Elaine responded by explaining that she had been extremely nervous during the entire situation, as she had not expected to be invited inside in the first place. She emphasized that she had remained focused solely on Kyle because those had been her orders, and she did not want to risk deviating from them. Tanya dismissed this reasoning, stating that it was basic logic and accusing Elaine of wasting a golden opportunity. She bluntly suggested that the real reason Elaine had failed to gather any information was because she had become emotionally involved and was falling for him. Elaine immediately objected to this accusation, telling Tanya not to search for faults in everything she did and insisting that her actions had been justified. At that point, Veronica stepped in firmly and ordered Tanya to stop. Despite this, Tanya continued to argue that her reasoning was completely logical. She claimed that, in the end, Kyle was just a man, and manipulating him to extract information would not be a difficult task. She then turned to Veronica and questioned whether she truly did not trust her to handle such a mission. Veronica responded in a calm yet authoritative tone, warning that confidence could easily turn into arrogance if left unchecked. She stated that she had heard enough of the argument and made it clear that she had never instructed Tanya to form any kind of relationship with a man for the sake of a mission. Tanya, still dissatisfied, pointed out that Elaine was often allowed to build such relationships while she was not. In response, Veronica concluded the discussion by stating that the difference lay in Tanya herself because she possessed a cardio card. Elaine suddenly broke into laughter after hearing Veronica's comment about Tanya's cardio card. Between laughs, she insisted that Veronica was completely wrong and had no sense of humor, adding that Tanya was clearly not the kind of woman to give advice on relationships or missions. She further mocked the idea, suggesting that since Tanya herself held a cardio card but had no real field experience, it was almost useless for her to be advising others at all. Veronica, maintaining a stern expression, replied that this was not something to be proud of. Elaine, however, continued in a sarcastic tone and turned toward Tanya, thanking her mockingly while adding that Tanya was the reason unicorns still exist, clearly intending to provoke her. Tanya immediately shouted back, insisting that it was not a trivial matter. She argued that despite Elaine's so-called experience, she had still failed to extract any meaningful information during her mission. Elaine calmly responded that she had, in fact, gathered useful information. Tanya dismissed this claim and pointed out that the only thing Elaine had learned was that Jonathan occasionally went to the annex whenever he felt like it, which, in her opinion, was not useful at all, since there was no pattern or timing to it. At this point, Veronica intervened and ordered both of them to stop arguing. She stated firmly that she would not tolerate being told by someone holding a cardio card how to conduct relationships or missions involving men. However, Tanya immediately replied that she had no issue with that arrangement. Hearing this, Veronica's patience finally snapped. She angrily ordered Tanya to leave and temporarily surrender her cardio card, which made Tanya even more irritated. Tanya, already boiling with frustration, declared that she was going out to drink because she was too angry to stay any longer. She then questioned whether she was even being allowed to leave freely and announced that she was heading to the drunken sailor. Before she could fully leave, Veronica called after her and reminded her about the letter they intended to deliver to Baron Cohen, asking whether she had it with her. Tanya replied that she did, explaining that Veronica had instructed her to keep it on her at all times so she could deliver it whenever the opportunity arose. After saying this, she left. Elaine watched Tanya go with a slightly concerned expression and told Veronica that she might have been too harsh on her, even offering to go after her. Veronica, however, told her to let Tanya go, explaining that she needed to cool off and that it was unlikely she would actually do anything reckless. She added that her intention was simply to show Tanya that she was not suited for the job. Meanwhile, Tanya arrived at the bar and began drinking heavily. As she sat there, she looked around at the men present and scoffed to herself, thinking that none of them were even worth the effort of her cardio card or worth performing any training session with. She also judged the women accompanying them, thinking they all had poor taste in men. Suddenly, a familiar scent caught her attention as someone entered the bar. Turning her gaze, she realized it was Kyle Lucas. Instantly, she muttered to herself that she knew it was him. Noticing his cloak, she thought that it would not be enough to hide him from her. She also recalled that she had once warned him not to come to this area, and now, seeing him here, she felt the timing was perfect since she was already in a highly irritated mood. In her mind, she decided she would intimidate him. However, despite her anger, she also caught herself briefly acknowledging that he was somewhat good-looking, before quickly recalling Veronica's harsh words, which reignited her frustration. Kyle was speaking with the bartender when Tanya continued observing him. She considered the possibility that it might just be a coincidence if he was truly here for another reason. Still, she reasoned that there would be no harm in testing him. In her mind, she convinced herself that if he truly was the man she suspected, then she could use this moment as an opportunity for cardio training with him. Finally, she approached him and spoke with confidence, saying that she knew it was him. She accused him of being the so-called noble knight who had ignored her warnings. She also added that she had already heard about him from her friend Elaine, which had only increased her curiosity about him. Tanya introduced herself to Kyle, and he proceeded to ask her about her last name. However, she declined to reveal it and clearly stated that she was not going to share her last name with him because she considered him to be rather strange and unsettling in his behavior. After that exchange, she ordered a drink for herself in a calm manner, and he also ordered the same drink for himself. While doing so, he kept thinking that he had come there with certain expectations connected to the Cecil words. Yet, according to the owner, nothing suspicious had been observed, which made him feel that his efforts had ultimately gone to waste. At the same time, he also reflected that encountering an assassin in such an unexpected way was an unusual outcome, and he doubted that she had any prior knowledge of his arrival there. In that sense, he concluded internally that both of them had, in a way, been fortunate to cross paths under such circumstances. He continued observing her closely and attentively, while she eventually questioned whether he was genuinely staring at her. In response, he casually remarked that it seemed more like she herself was the delusional one in that situation. At the same time, his inner thoughts judged her as being somewhat childish, and he questioned whether her behavior was merely an immature attempt to provoke or draw his attention in a pathetic manner. He remained uncertain about her intentions, but he reasoned to himself that in most cases, at least 9 out of 10 men would likely avoid such a situation or even run away, since it was quite obvious to him that she might be operating with hidden motives. He even went as far as thinking that such behavior would be unlikely even from a naive country maiden, reinforcing his suspicion that her actions were not as simple as they appeared. After these thoughts, he directly told her that he was already aware that she knew he was seeing her friend Elaine. Tanya then responded in a composed way, stating that, as far as she knew, the situation between them was not serious at all, and she further suggested that neither of them had any real obligation or reason to remain faithful to one another. She also questioned whether they were actually in a proper and committed relationship in the first place. In reply, he stated that they were not, while simultaneously thinking to himself that Elaine was already seeing him as well. This created a sense of confusion in his mind, as he could not fully understand why a woman belonging to the same assassin group would attempt to draw his attention in such a direct manner. He also considered the possibility that she might try to contact him further, and this led him to briefly wonder whether Elaine might have developed feelings for him, which made him feel somewhat conflicted. In that moment, he even thought that perhaps he should have shared certain information with Elaine earlier. As his thoughts continued, he concluded internally that in order for Elaine to be cleared of any suspicion arising from this situation, he might need to handle things involving Tanya in a more controlled or even entertaining manner. Following this internal reasoning, he invited Tanya to spend some time with him. After they had their drinks together and spent that time in conversation, both of them eventually moved to a room where they continued and carried out a workout session together as planned. After completing the workout session with Tanya, Kyle Lucas began checking through her belongings with a focused and cautious mindset. He was thinking that he might discover something useful, perhaps a key to her hideout or some kind of direct clue that would make his search easier. In his mind, he had expected the situation to be more straightforward and quick to resolve, but instead of finding what he was originally looking for, he unexpectedly came across a letter among the items in his possession. The letter was addressed to Baron Henry Cohen. The moment he saw it, his attention sharpened, and he immediately became more serious. He internally concluded that this information was significant enough to change his current direction, and he thought that he could no longer afford to move slowly. In his mind, it felt as though he had entered a race against time, and every second had started to matter more than before. At that moment, Tanya suddenly woke up from her sleep and immediately warned him not to tell anyone that they had completed the workout session together, especially not Elaine. She sounded cautious and serious while saying this. Kyle Lucas responded in a calm and slightly dismissive tone, saying that she did not need to remind him of something so obvious, as it would already be awkward enough if people discovered that he had been in a private training session with the man his friend was currently involved with. He reassured her again, telling her not to worry, and added that he had dealt with situations like this before, so it was not something new for him. Tanya then mentioned that they should meet again in the future sometime, and he agreed to the suggestion without showing much resistance or concern. After their conversation, Tanya later went to Veronica and informed her that she had lost her cardio training card, adding that she had already done what was expected of her in the situation. Veronica reacted in a firm and unconvinced manner, stating that she had not actually instructed Tanya to do anything of that nature, and that she would not accept her explanation unless she saw solid proof herself. At the same time, Elaine also expressed curiosity about whether Tanya had truly gone through a real-life workout session, as she claimed. As the discussion continued, Elaine gradually began to realize that Tanya was indeed telling the truth, which made her even more curious, especially about Tanya's first-time experience. Veronica, on the other hand, looked visibly disappointed and remarked that there was no point in overreacting or dwelling on the matter. She sarcastically congratulated Tanya for losing her cardio training card, and then added that what mattered more was honesty, even if the truth was uncomfortable. She further insisted that Tanya should clearly admit whether it was truly her first experience. Tanya, however, remained silent and refused to disclose any details, continuing to deny them an answer. Meanwhile, inside the residence, the chief maid was speaking with Kyle Lucas and expressing clear concern about his absence. She reminded him that he had said he would return last night, yet he still had not come back by morning. She explained that she had grown worried during that time, even considering the possibility that something might have gone wrong, and she had even thought about going out to search for him herself if he had not returned by dinner time. Kyle responded by asking whether she was actually worried about him, making a slight comment that people tend to become more caring as they grow older, and suggesting that there must be a reason behind such behavior. The chief maid, however, replied sternly that she had only been thinking that a hound without a proper sense of time needed discipline and correction so that he would not misunderstand things. Kyle then shifted the conversation and explained that something unexpected had occurred during his time away, revealing that an assassin named Tanya had met him on the way, and that he had also uncovered Baron Cohen's involvement in the matter. He emphasized once again that the most important thing now was that he needed to meet Baron Cohen in person as soon as possible, without delay. The chief maid responded by pointing out that, even if Baron Cohen did not hold a position equal to the young master, to him Kyle was still considered nothing more than a mere guard, and that regardless of any commander title, simply requesting a meeting would not guarantee access or acceptance. Kyle, however, insisted that the situation was urgent and time-sensitive, repeating that he needed to find a way to make Baron Cohen leave everything aside and meet him immediately. While this tense discussion continued, Sion unexpectedly arrived and said that she had been searching for both of them everywhere. Her sudden appearance made both Kyle and the chief maid look at her with suspicion, and noticing their reaction, she quickly clarified that she had not done anything wrong. Kyle and the chief maid approached Sion with a request that she meet Baron Cohen on their behalf. However, Sion immediately refused, stating that this was not part of the original plan. Kyle then explained that young Master Jonathan had personally entrusted him with a message to deliver to Baron Cohen, and therefore he could not arrange a private meeting with the Baron alone. In response, Sion questioned whether he was essentially asking her to impersonate her brother in order to meet Baron Cohen. Kyle calmly replied that as long as she could arrange the meeting and accompany him, he would handle the conversation himself. Sion, however, pointed out that this request was far removed from anything she had done so far. She described it as almost torturous to keep pretending to be her older brother in front of others. Still, acknowledging she had no real choice, she reluctantly agreed. She added that she and Henry Cohen were already acquainted, having met at Lila Cohen's birthday party the previous year. Because of that prior connection, she felt the disguise might not hold up well, especially since Henry Cohen was a friend of Jonathan and unlikely to be easily deceived. Even so, she admitted that if there was no alternative, she would proceed. Kyle reassured her that she did not need to worry and suggested they forget the idea entirely. He apologized for even bringing her into it and said they would think of another way. The chief maid then questioned whether Kyle already had another plan in mind. He admitted that he did not, but said he would try to think of one. The chief maid reminded him that he himself had said time was running out. Kyle responded honestly that he had not truly wanted to involve Sion in the matter in the first place, as it was ultimately his responsibility. The chief maid then insisted that they did not have the luxury of searching for alternatives. She told Sion that Kyle desperately needed her help and that she was the only one who could assist him. At that point, Sion directly asked Kyle for confirmation. Kyle reflected internally that this was his only option, even though he could not guarantee her safety. He was asking her to accompany him to meet a man who could potentially be an enemy. From the information he had gathered, he was increasingly certain that Baron Cohen was connected to the assassins. After reading Tanya's letter, he had also concluded that the relationships between them were far more complicated than they initially appeared. He believed there was still value in confronting the Baron directly, but time was running out, and they were being pushed toward a corner with no return. Finally, he admitted that he needed her help. Sion, after hearing his honest admission, decided to assist him in return. However, she requested a future favor in exchange. Kyle agreed without hesitation. Following this, Sion prepared herself by disguising as her brother, Jonathan. The chief maid carefully examined her appearance and praised the disguise, stating that she could not see a single flaw. She added that Sion's naturally distinctive features, particularly her physique, were cleverly balanced with a deliberately large and flashy brooch designed to divert attention away from anything suspicious. Sion remarked that she had never expected to be involved in such an arrangement. The chief maid explained that while Kyle was speaking with Baron Cohen, they would require someone to remain beside Sion, namely young Master Jonathan's representative role. Kyle, observing the situation, thought more precisely that they were effectively stepping into enemy territory and therefore needed strong coordination and support. With the plan settled, they proceeded to Baron Cohen's residence. Upon arrival, Sion noted that it had been a long time since she had last been there. They were received formally, and it was announced that Baron Henry Cohen was awaiting them. They were then escorted toward his chambers. Kyle requested that they be shown to the parlor instead. Once there, he instructed Sion and the chief maid to remain and stay alert, quietly warning them that they were on hostile ground. In a low voice, the chief maid reassured him not to worry about them and advised him to focus solely on his objective. She added that if anything unusual occurred, she would drop and break a vase as a signal, confident it would be heard even from the Baron's chambers. Until that signal, she insisted they keep their attention fixed on the target while she handled the rest. Kyle agreed and then proceeded alone toward Baron Henry Cohen's chamber. Inside, the Baron immediately questioned his presence, remarking that he seemed familiar and asking why he had returned without Jonathan. Kyle expressed polite honor at being remembered and introduced himself as Sion's guard, also stating that he had been assigned in the past and present to protect Count Jonathan Ruslan. The Baron then pointed out that he should not have attempted to enter his chambers directly. Kyle explained that young Master Jonathan could not join them that day, as many unexpected matters had arisen recently, and he had simply wished for a peaceful life. The Baron responded that this explanation made him even more concerned about what was coming next. He remarked that he already had a suspicion, and although he considered Kyle's behavior insolent, he was willing to hear him out. However, before continuing, he mentioned that he had instructed his maid to bring tea. He noted that the maid was likely already standing outside the door and asked Kyle to bring in the tray. Kyle opened the door only to find the maid already present. To his shock, the person standing there was Veronica, also known as Anna. Kyle, while observing Veronica, was internally thinking that the assassin who had disguised herself as a maid and infiltrated their residence was standing right there in front of him, acting completely natural. This realization kept pressing on his mind, making him quietly question everything he was seeing. He further reflected that perhaps he had not been viewing the situation in its entirety, and there might be deeper connections between the Baron and the assassins than he had originally assumed. A troubling thought began to form in his mind that stepping into the Baron's residence might have been a mistake from the very beginning. Veronica politely asked him if it would be all right for her to go inside and serve tea. Without waiting for resistance, she stepped forward and began serving them tea in a composed and professional manner. As she poured, she also asked if he would prefer milk in his tea. Kyle calmly replied that he was fine without it, adding in a detached tone that he already had a strong memory of a maid once serving him tea in a similar way. Veronica acknowledged his response with quiet politeness and said that she would remain just outside the door, ready if anything was needed. At that moment, the Baron casually stated that they would manage fine and instructed Veronica to go check on Jonathan instead, mentioning that he seemed to be entering the residence and was likely in the lobby area. Kyle, meanwhile, was carefully analyzing every word and movement around him. In his mind, the entire situation felt like a subtle psychological setup. He thought that their conversation might be intentionally structured to pressure or intimidate him. His suspicion deepened as he considered that Anna, the assassin, disguised as a maid, and the Baron could be connected to the assassin group. The fact that the Baron had openly mentioned the young master's location and instructed Anna to attend to him right in front of Kyle felt deliberate, almost as if it was being done to gauge his reaction. Kyle concluded internally that the Baron might be testing him, trying to measure how much information he already possessed. Despite the unease building within him, he forced himself to stay composed and controlled. He reasoned that if they truly intended harm, they would not be engaging in such indirect behavior or testing him. They would have already acted without hesitation. With that logic, he decided that pretending ignorance and staying observant was the safest strategy for now. The presence of the chief maid nearby gave him some reassurance, and he silently decided to place cautious trust in her while maintaining his neutral expression. The Baron then spoke again, telling Kyle that he could now state the purpose of his visit, as he was curious about what had brought him there. Kyle responded in a measured tone that he would make it worth the Baron's time to speak with him. However, the Baron immediately interrupted him, dismissing the polite formalities and telling him to speak directly without unnecessary wording. Kyle then stated plainly that he had come to help the Baron and that he was aware the Baron was being blackmailed. This statement caused visible shock in the Baron's expression. Kyle quickly added that he was not permitted to reveal how he knew this information, but implied that a friend had informed him of the situation. At the same time, Kyle's thoughts drifted into deeper analysis. He recalled the letter Tanya had prepared for Baron Henry Cohen. He remembered how unusual it had been, not threatening in a direct or aggressive way, but instead written in a calm, almost gentle and indirect tone. It had almost seemed harmless at first glance, which made it even more unsettling. He found it mildly ironic as well. The message had been carefully crafted in a way that nobles would fully understand, using refined language rather than crude threats or insults. Kyle realized that in noble society, direct insults or vulgar language often lost their impact, whereas carefully structured phrasing carried far more weight and influence. This made him understand that the assassin group they were dealing with was far more sophisticated than he had initially assumed. They were not simply violent individuals, but highly trained professionals who adjusted their methods depending on their target's mindset and social standing. He further concluded that Elaine and Tanya, despite their individual flaws, were operating under a leader who was significantly more dangerous, strategic, and experienced than either of them. That realization made the entire situation feel even more serious in his mind. Meanwhile, Veronica stepped outside and approached butler Caleb, who was standing nearby. She calmly informed him that she would take care of the guest inside so he could continue with his other responsibilities. Nearby, the chief maid's younger brother quietly listened to their exchange, observing without interrupting. Inside the room, Kyle continued speaking with Baron Cohen. He explained that one of the demands mentioned in the blackmail threat involved recommending a maid for the Ruslan household, and that the maid in question was Anna Katrina. He then insisted that the Baron answer him truthfully, clarifying that he was not interrogating him but genuinely attempting to help resolve the situation. The Baron then questioned whether Jonathan was also aware of everything, suggesting that this was likely the reason Jonathan had sent Kyle instead of meeting him personally. He added bitterly that Jonathan did not want to share a room with someone he considered a traitor, and admitted that he understood why he was being treated this way, saying he deserved it. Kyle immediately cut him off, telling him to stop speaking in self-pity and emotional excuses. He stated firmly that he had not come all this way to listen to the complaints of a man who had surrendered so easily to threats. The Baron, now visibly agitated, raised his voice in frustration. He argued that if a family member had been kidnapped and held hostage, anyone would have reacted in the same way. and that friendship alone would not outweigh the instinct to protect one's family. After hearing this, Kyle responded more calmly but firmly. He admitted that he had not been aware of the full circumstances earlier. He then revealed that he was an orphan who had never even seen his parents. However, he added that if someone important to him were ever placed in danger, he believed he could understand that kind of desperation. He then apologized for his earlier harsh tone, explaining that he had intentionally provoked the Baron to break through his emotional state and bring him back to rational thinking, which now appeared to have worked. The Baron then asked Kyle again if he was truly just a guard. Kyle replied that as a guard serving the Duke's household, he held himself to strict standards, and therefore the Baron should now explain everything that had occurred that day without further delay. After hearing the full account, Kyle realized that the Baron's sister, Lady Lila Cohen, had been kidnapped. The Baron then explained that the morning after her abduction, he had discovered a letter on his desk. Since that day, he had continued receiving similar threatening letters. He asked Kyle if he could identify anything unusual about them. Kyle carefully examined the details and pointed out that the letters were written on different types of paper. This suggested that the sender had deliberately sourced stationery from various places to avoid leaving a trace. However, the handwriting remained consistent across all letters, indicating they were all written by the same individual. The Baron confirmed this with a heavy expression, stating that he recognized the handwriting very well. It belonged to his sister, Lila. Kyle's expression tightened internally as he realized the implication that the kidnappers had forced the hostage herself to write the threatening letters. He thought to himself that this method was both cruel and highly efficient, as it demonstrated complete control over her, while also psychologically reassuring the Baron that she was still alive and unharmed as long as he complied. It was a far more sophisticated form of coercion than simple threats or violence. He further analyzed that the kidnappers were extremely cautious and highly methodical, showing an obsession with avoiding any traceable evidence. Kyle then asked the Baron whether he had ever known them personally. At that exact moment, Kyle suddenly heard the sound of a vase breaking outside. The vase had been broken accidentally by Veronica, and in the process her hand had started bleeding. The incident had happened so quickly that the full context of it was not immediately clear, yet Kyle, without waiting to understand the details, had already formed the wrong conclusion. He stepped forward with visible anger and confronted her harshly, speaking as though she had intentionally caused harm or was planning something suspicious. His tone carried accusation and certainty, as if he already knew her intent. The chief maid, who had been standing nearby and had seen everything unfold, immediately stepped in between them. She raised her voice and told Kyle that he had gone far enough and that his actions were beginning to cross a line, warning him that he was about to hurt Veronica. Kyle, still tense and defensive, responded that they did not have the luxury of misjudging situations or acting carelessly, implying that in their current circumstances, hesitation or softness could not be afforded. However, the chief maid firmly countered him, insisting that regardless of the situation, he should have allowed Veronica to leave and should not have escalated things in that manner. Her words carried both frustration and concern, forcing Kyle to pause and reassess what had just occurred. After the confrontation settled, the chief maid moved closer to Veronica and gently began bandaging her injured hand. Veronica, still visibly shaken and emotional, struggled to hold back her tears as she tried to explain herself. She said that she had only accidentally dropped and broken the saucer, and that there had been no intention behind it whatsoever. She repeated that she did not deserve to be treated so harshly over something that had been an accident. The chief maid responded in a calmer tone, acknowledging her words and agreeing that she was right. She carefully examined the injury while continuing to bandage it, noting that Veronica had even hurt her own hand in the process. She added that she did not blame her for becoming upset, especially considering how badly she was bleeding. Looking at the wound more closely, she expressed concern that the cut might have been deeper than it initially appeared and worried that it could leave a scar. At that moment, the Baron emerged from the room, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. He looked at the situation and asked whether his maid had done something wrong. He stated that her name was Clara Jane and that she had been serving in their household for the past 7 years without issue. Kyle then turned to the Baron and spoke in a more controlled tone, stating that there had clearly been a misunderstanding. He added that their conversation should have been completed inside the chamber rather than in the open, and insisted that there were matters he still needed to discuss with him privately. At the same time, Sion, who was present nearby, made brief eye contact with the Baron. At that moment, she became uneasy and thought that he might recognize her. Because of this concern, Kyle had earlier instructed her to turn her head if their eyes met, ensuring that she would not be identified. Soon after, Kyle and the Baron moved inside the chamber to continue their discussion. Once inside, the Baron was visibly surprised when Kyle revealed a troubling observation that the individual, known as Anna Katrine, the one for whom the Baron had written a recommendation letter, bore an exact resemblance to Clara. The Baron, however, clarified that while he had indeed written the recommendation letter, he had never met the person himself. Kyle then began laying out his reasoning in detail. He explained that it was possible the individuals surveilling the Cohen residence had observed Clara beforehand and deliberately used her appearance as part of their disguise or larger scheme. He added that anyone with even minimal understanding of such operations would naturally keep watch over the person they intended to blackmail or manipulate. Because of this logic, he initially believed Clara to be Anna and assumed that the Baron might not be an innocent victim in the matter. In his reasoning, there would otherwise be no justification for allowing a suspected spy to remain inside the residence. However, after reassessing the situation, he admitted that he had been mistaken and that the real implication was more concerning that the Cohen residence was being monitored from the outside. Meanwhile, Tanya was observing the situation from a concealed position outside. Due to the cloudy conditions, her visibility was limited and she struggled to clearly see what was happening inside. She continued to analyze his movements and tried to understand what his true objective might be in being involved in this situation. Inside, Kyle asked the Baron directly if there was anything he wanted to know about the individuals who were threatening him. The Baron replied that he could not disclose anything unless he was certain that his sister was safe. Kyle immediately criticized this stance, calling it dishonorable and implying that withholding information under such circumstances was unacceptable. The Baron, however, defended himself and explained that he had no alternative. He admitted that he had once betrayed a friend in order to protect his family, and now he was being forced into a similar position again. In order to protect his family once more, he needed help. With that burden on him, he requested Kyle's assistance in rescuing his sister, Lila Cohen, promising that he would do anything in return once she was safely brought back. Kyle responded coldly but firmly, stating that if the Baron agreed to one condition, he would not require any further reward. He demanded that the Baron place his honor on the line and, once Lila Cohen was rescued, reveal everything he knew without holding anything back. After the discussion concluded, Kyle returned to Sion and informed her that his conversation with the Baron was finished. He stated that he had obtained the information he had come for and believed he had handled the situation appropriately. However, the chief maid immediately scolded him, criticizing his judgment. She pointed out that he had been the one who misunderstood the situation and had once again caused distress to an innocent maid. She urged him to reflect on his actions more carefully. She added that, as she had always told him, he tended to develop tunnel vision when focused on a goal, which was one of his weaknesses. She further explained that his deeper flaw was not simply what he did, but how he interpreted what he saw and assumed. Kyle, however, brushed off her criticism and stated that he had another person he needed to meet. He instructed her to return first and assured her that she should explain everything to the lady in his absence. The chief maid then asked who he was going to meet, but Kyle replied that even he was not entirely certain, only that he was aware they were being watched at that very moment. Kyle then stepped outside wearing a cloak, moving into a quiet and isolated area. As he walked, he thought to himself that the place was sufficiently secluded and that it should be suitable for whoever was observing him to approach under the guise of coincidence. At that moment, Tanya suddenly called out his name from behind. Kyle turned around immediately and, upon seeing her, realized that she was the one who had been monitoring the Cohen residence. This confirmed a suspicion he had already been carrying. Kyle spoke first, telling her that he had come there solely to see her. Tanya, however, responded by asking where he had come from. Kyle countered her question by asking why she needed to know. She explained that she was curious because he carried a distinct scent, a strange and unpleasant smell, almost revolting, similar to the perfumes commonly used by nobles. Kyle replied that he did not understand what she meant by scent and stated that he simply worked for a noble household. Internally, however, he suspected that she was trying to push him into admitting that he had come from the Cohen residence. Tanya again insisted that his scent was different from usual and told him to simply answer directly. Kyle dismissed her demand and told her to let it go. Without hesitation, Tanya then leaned closer to him and began sniffing him more closely, continuing her inspection as if trying to confirm her suspicion through her own observation.